The Texas sun hadn't cleared the horizon yet, but Emma Cassidy was already awake. She had been for the past hour, lying in the narrow bed of her childhood room, staring at the ceiling fan that had turned lazy circles above her head for 23 years. The blades moved through the pre-dawn darkness like the second hand of a clock that never quite caught up to itself. 5:15 in the morning, same time every day for the past 7 years. She swung her legs out of bed, feet finding the cool hardwood floor with practiced ease. No alarm needed. Her body knew the rhythm the way a heart knows to beat. Down the hall, she could hear her father's labored breathing through the half-open door of his bedroom. The sound had changed over the past year. Rougher now. More effort required for each cycle of air. Emma pulled on her work clothes in the dark. Jeans worn soft at the knees. Steel-toed boots that had seen 3 years of range work. A faded navy t-shirt that said Ironwood Tactical across the back in letters that had cracked and peeled until only the outline remained. She tied her hair back without looking in the mirror. There wasn't time for vanity when the sun came up at 6 and her shift started at 6:15. The hallway smelled like coffee. That meant her father was already awake, already in the kitchen despite the doctor's orders to rest, to take it easy, to let someone else do the heavy lifting for once in his life. Colonel James Cassidy, retired, sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee trembling in his right hand. The tremor had started 18 months ago. Parkinson's, the neurologist had said. Early onset, probably triggered by the trauma his body had endured over 28 years in the Marine Corps. The shrapnel in his shoulder didn't help. Neither did the 3 surgeries or the chronic pain that followed him like a shadow he couldn't shake. But his mind was still sharp. Sharp enough to notice Emma standing in the doorway. Sharp enough to see the way she looked at him every morning, checking for signs of decline the way you check a gauge on a machine that was running too hot. "You're up early," he said. His voice was gravel and smoke, worn down by years of shouting orders over gunfire and wind and the roar of helicopters. "Same time as always," Emma replied. She crossed to the coffee pot and poured herself a cup. Black, no sugar, the way he'd taught her to drink it when she was 16 and trying to stay awake through her first all-night study session. Jim watched his daughter move through the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to waste nothing. Not time, not motion, not words. She had his eyes. Dark and steady, the kind that could track a target at 400 yards or read the truth in a man's face from across a room. She had her mother's hands, though. Long fingers, steady as iron when they needed to be. "Your thesis defense is next month," Jim said. Emma didn't look up from her coffee. "I rescheduled it." The silence that followed had weight to it. Jim set his cup down carefully, the tremor making the porcelain rattle against the saucer. "That's the 3rd time," he said. "You have the neurology appointment at Travis County Medical. Someone needs to drive you." "I can take a cab." "With what money, Dad?" Emma finally turned to face him. "The VA doesn't cover everything. The medications alone are $3,200 a month. I checked the account. We've got maybe 6 weeks before we're in the red." Jim's jaw tightened. "That's my problem to solve." "No," Emma said quietly, "it's our problem, and I'm solving it the only way I know how." She drained her coffee in 3 long swallows, rinsed the cup, and set it in the dish rack. The conversation was over because there was nothing left to say. They'd had this same argument in different variations for the past 2 years, ever since Jim's disability pension proved insufficient to cover the mounting costs of keeping a dying man alive. Emma grabbed her keys from the hook by the door. She could feel her father's eyes on her back. "Em." She stopped but didn't turn around. "You're not my caretaker," Jim said. "You're my daughter, there's a difference." Emma's hand tightened around her keys until the metal bit into her palm. I'll be home by 6. There's leftover chicken in the fridge for lunch. She was out the door before he could respond, before the tightness in her chest could turn into something she'd have to name. The drive to Ironwood Tactical Range took 17 minutes through the awakening sprawl of Texas Hill Country. Emma's Honda Civic had 243,000 miles on it and a transmission that slipped in third gear, but it started every morning, and that was all she asked of it. The radio didn't work. She drove in silence, watching the landscape shift from residential streets to two-lane highways to the long gravel road that led to the range. Ironwood sat on 80 acres of former ranch land, surrounded by live oak and cedar elm and the kind of rolling hills that looked gentle until you tried to walk them. The main building was a low concrete structure with a metal roof that rang like a bell when it rained. Behind it, the ranges stretched out in careful rows. Pistol, rifle, shotgun, tactical, each one maintained to standards that would make a Marine Corps armorer proud. Wade Kruger's truck was already in the parking lot when Emma arrived. That wasn't unusual. Wade lived in a small house on the property, had ever since he'd bought the land and built the range 15 years ago. He was standing by the equipment shed, a cigarette burning between his fingers despite the doctor's orders, despite the promise he'd made to quit. Emma parked in her usual spot, far from the main building where the instructors and clients would park later in the day. She grabbed her tool bag from the passenger seat and headed for the shotgun bay. The morning air was cool enough to raise goosebumps on her arms, carrying the smell of gun oil and earth, and the faint metallic tang of spent brass that never quite washed away. Wade watched her approach. He was 55 years old and looked 70, carved down to bone and gristle by 2 decades in Delta Force and the years that followed. He'd served 3 tours with Jim Cassidy, saved his life once in Ramadi, nearly died together in Fallujah, the kind of brotherhood that didn't need words to communicate. "Your old man doing okay?" Wade asked. Emma set down her tool bag, same as yesterday. "That bad, huh?" She didn't answer. Instead, she walked the shotgun course with the kind of focus that made conversation impossible. 3 steel plates had come loose during yesterday's training session. One of the reactive poppers was hanging at an angle that would cause ricochets if she didn't fix it. Sloppy work got people hurt. Her father had drilled that into her skull before she was old enough to understand what it meant. She worked methodically, tightening bolts and checking angles with a torque wrench that had belonged to her father. Each movement was precise, economical, the product of years spent watching him work, learning the difference between good enough and right. Wade leaned against the fence line, smoking and watching. "You hear about the Marine instructor selection happening here next week?" Emma didn't look up, heard something about it. 12 candidates, 7 days, 1 position at Quantico, Advanced Marksmanship Unit, $95,000 a year. The wrench slipped in Emma's hand. She caught it before it fell, adjusted her grip, and kept working. "You'd be perfect for it," Wade said. "I'm not qualified." "You shoot better than anyone I've ever seen except your father." "I've never competed, never served, never even finished my degree." Wade took a long drag on his cigarette. "Your father didn't raise someone who's not qualified." Emma tightened the last bolt on the silhouette target and stepped back to check her work. The steel hung perfect, angled to deflect fragments downward, positioned at exactly 65 yards from the firing line. She'd measured it 3 times to be sure. "I need to finish the rifle bay before the clients arrive," she said. Wade watched her walk away. He'd known Emma Cassidy since she was 11 years old, had watched Jim train her with the same intensity he'd brought to every mission, every operation, every moment of his military career. He'd also watched her put her life on hold for the past 2 years, working 3 jobs to keep her father alive, postponing graduation, postponing everything that looked like a future. The old Delta operator crushed his cigarette under his boot and headed back to the main building. He had calls to make. Emma spent the next 3 hours preparing the range for the day's training sessions. She reset targets, swept brass casings into collection bins, checked weapons for carbon buildup and worn parts. The work was mindless in the best way, allowing her thoughts to drift while her hands moved through familiar patterns. She thought about her thesis defense. 3 years of research on emergency trauma response protocols, delayed indefinitely because her father needed her. She thought about the job posting Wade had mentioned. $95,000 would solve every financial problem they had. It would pay for the medications, the physical therapy, the neurologist visits that kept getting scheduled and rescheduled based on whether they could afford the copay. But the idea of applying felt like a fantasy. She was 23 years old with an incomplete degree and no official credentials. What did she have to offer the Marine Corps? The ability to reset targets, a talent for organization learned from watching YouTube videos and reading her father's old training manuals. The sound of engines pulled her from her thoughts, not the usual steady stream of pickup trucks and sedans that marked the arrival of regular clients. These were heavy vehicles, moving in formation, the kind that announced their presence before they came into view. 3 black SUVs rolled into the parking lot at exactly 0600 hours. Military precision. Emma recognized it immediately. The vehicles parked in a perfect line. Doors opened simultaneously. Men emerged with the kind of casual coordination that came from training together, operating together, trusting each other with their lives in places most people only saw on the news. Navy SEALs. Emma could tell from 50 yards away. It was something in the way they moved, the way they carried themselves with that particular brand of confidence that came from being among the most elite warriors on the planet. Wade emerged from the main building to greet them. Emma watched from the equipment shed, staying out of the way. This was his range, his clients, his world. She was just the maintenance tech. The SEAL team consisted of 8 men. Most of them were in their 30s, weather-beaten and hard-eyed, moving with the economy of motion that marked professional operators. But one stood out. Younger, maybe late 20s, with newer gear and boots that hadn't yet acquired the scuffed patina of extensive field work. Emma's eye for detail, honed by years of observation, cataloged the differences automatically. The young SEAL's chest rig sat slightly too high on his torso. His stance was just a fraction too wide. Small things that probably didn't matter in most situations but would create inefficiencies under stress. The team leader was obvious, not because he was the loudest or most imposing, but because the others deferred to him with the unconscious respect of men who'd followed him into hell and back. He was speaking with Wade, shaking hands with the familiarity of old acquaintances. Emma turned back to her work. The SEALs were here for pre-deployment training. Wade had mentioned it last week. 3 days of intensive shotgun work before they shipped out to somewhere the government wouldn't name. It wasn't her business. She had targets to maintain and a schedule to keep. The team began setting up their gear while Emma finished her safety checks. She moved along the perimeter of the tactical shotgun course, verifying backstops, ensuring reactive steel was properly angled, checking that nothing had shifted overnight. Everything was perfect because at Ironwood, everything always was. Wade had built this range with the same attention to detail he'd brought to every mission in Delta Force. Emma maintained it with the same discipline her father had instilled in her since childhood. Between the two of them, Ironwood Tactical had earned a reputation as one of the premier training facilities in Texas. From her usual position near the control shed, Emma watched the SEALs begin their first run through the course. 12 steel targets arranged from 20 to 70 yards, mixing silhouettes, poppers, and hostage scenarios. Standard tactical shotgun work, though they were running it faster than most units she'd observed. The team leader went first. Emma noted the name tape on his uniform, Bradford, Master Chief based on the rank insignia. He moved through the course with textbook precision, transitions smooth, reloads efficient. But Emma noticed something others might miss. A slight favoring of his left side on the pivot moves, probably compensating for an old injury. The kind of tell that wouldn't matter against paper targets but could get you killed in a dynamic environment. The second SEAL, Chen according to his name tape, had excellent fundamentals but rushed his final shots. Competition shooting background, Emma guessed. Speed prioritized over precision. He dropped one target at 60 yards because of it. Emma found herself timing their runs without consciously deciding to. The way she'd timed everything since she was 12 years old, and her father had first put a shotgun in her hands. She remembered that first lesson with crystalline clarity. Standing in the backyard of their old house, the Remington 870 looking enormous in her small hands. The weight of it, the smell of gun oil, the way her father had positioned himself behind her, hands gentle on her shoulders. Shooting isn't about the gun, Em. His voice had been patient, the way it always was when he was teaching. It's about controlling yourself. The gun just goes where you tell it to go, but if you're not in control of you, the gun won't be either. She'd carried those words through every weekend training session, every drill, every moment she'd spent observing shooters at Ironwood for the past 7 years. Watching, learning, cataloging the 1,000 small ways that technique could succeed or fail. The rhythm of the SEAL training broke when the youngest operator stepped up to the line. His name tape read Grant, Lieutenant, junior grade. Everything about him screamed new money and old expectations. The way he checked his weapon had the mechanical precision of someone who'd learned by the book but hadn't yet made it instinct. Grant's first miss came at 40 yards, a clean whiff on a chest-high silhouette that should have been automatic for a SEAL, then another miss at 50. By the time he reached the 70-yard line, frustration was written in every line of his body. He jerked the pump action like he was angry at the weapon itself. From her position behind the safety barrier, Emma could see exactly what was wrong. Grant was flinching, not from recoil but from anticipation. His support elbow kept drifting inward, destroying his stability. His shoulder wasn't properly welded to the stock, so he was absorbing recoil like a shock absorber instead of a solid platform. Worst of all, he was rushing his reloads, slapping the action so hard it threw off his sight alignment for the next shot. She'd seen the same mistakes from dozens of shooters over the years. Hell, she'd made some of them herself as a teenager until her father's patient corrections and endless repetition had burned the right techniques into her muscle memory. The fix was simple: lock the shoulder, smooth the pump, let the weapon do what it was designed to do. "What the hell's wrong with this thing?" Grant's voice carried across the range, sharp with frustration. He held up the Mossberg like it had personally offended him. Spread patterns all over the place. Must be a loose choke or something. One of the other SEALs chuckled. "Maybe the steel's allergic to you, man." No, seriously. Grant checked his ammunition, examined the barrel with the intensity of someone looking for any explanation except the obvious one. This shotgun's throwing shots like a drunk sailor. Something's definitely wrong with it. Emma had heard that exact complaint hundreds of times before. It was always the gun, never the shooter. She continued collecting spent shell casings with her magnetic pickup tool, staying invisible, staying in her lane. That was the smart play. Let the operators figure it out themselves. Her job was to maintain the equipment, not to critique elite warriors. But watching Grant blame perfectly good equipment for his own technical failures was like watching someone kick a dog for not understanding English. The shotgun wasn't the problem. Anyone with eyes could see that. "It's not the steel," Emma said quietly. The words slipped out before her filter could catch them. Her voice barely carried over the distance, but in the sudden quiet that followed, it might as well have been a gunshot. Grant turned toward her, confusion replacing frustration on his face. "What?" Emma straightened up from her shell collection, suddenly aware that 8 pairs of eyes were now focused on her. Every SEAL on the range had stopped what they were doing. The smart thing would be to apologize and go back to her work. The safe thing would be to say she'd misspoken. Instead, she heard her father's voice in her head, clear as if he were standing beside her. "If you see something wrong and don't speak up, you're part of the problem." "Steel's fine," Emma said, meeting Grant's stare. "Your shoulder's not locked. You're jerking the pump like it owes you money." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, the kind of quiet that meant something significant had just happened even if nobody was quite sure what it was yet. 8 elite warriors stared at the part-time range technician who just critiqued a Navy SEAL's shooting technique. That was when Master Chief Bradford stepped forward. He had the weathered look of someone who'd been places and seen things, with that particular stillness that came from years of making life and death decisions under pressure. His eyes, when they fixed on Emma, were alert and assessing. "You see something we didn't?" Bradford asked. His tone was neutral but carried the weight of genuine inquiry. Emma felt her heart rate spike. This was the moment where she could back down, apologize for overstepping, and return to comfortable invisibility. Or she could double down on what she'd observed. "Wasn't trying to interrupt your training," she said carefully. "Didn't say you did," Bradford replied. "So what was it?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Emma glanced at Grant, who was watching her with a mixture of skepticism and wounded pride. The other SEALs had formed a loose semicircle, their body language suggesting they were genuinely curious about what she might say. "His shoulders not locked into the stock," Emma began, choosing her words with the same care her father had taught her to use when handling explosives. "He's absorbing recoil like suspension instead of creating a solid platform. That's why his sight pictures inconsistent shot to shot." Bradford nodded slightly, encouraging her to continue. "He's also pulling the pump too early before his follow-through settles. Causes muzzle dip right when he should be tracking the sight picture for his next target. And when he reloads, he's slapping the action so hard it knocks the stock out of his shoulder pocket." She paused, then added what she'd been thinking but hadn't said. "Plus, he's overthinking the transitions. You can see him calculating instead of flowing. Makes him hesitate just long enough to throw off his timing." When she finished, the silence returned, but this time it felt different. Less skeptical, more analytical. These men were professionals. They could recognize technical knowledge when they heard it, even when it came from an unexpected source. Grant broke the quiet with a scoff. "Oh, come on. What are you, some kind of YouTube expert now?" Bradford's eyes never left Emma's face. "You saying she's wrong?" "I'm saying if she knows so much about it, maybe she ought to show us how it's done." The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a fired round. Emma felt her mouth go dry. She'd observed thousands of shooters, analyzed countless techniques, absorbed more tactical knowledge than most certified instructors possessed. But there was a vast difference between knowing and doing, especially under the scrutiny of elite operators. Bradford walked over to the Mossberg that Grant had abandoned, performed a chamber check with practiced efficiency, and engaged the safety. He turned and held the weapon out to Emma, grip first. "Let's see what she does," he said quietly. Every eye was on her now. No jokes, no smirks, just raw attention. Emma could feel the weight of the moment settling around her like a heavy coat. She could decline, make an excuse, retreat to safety. Or she could take the shotgun and prove that 7 years of observation had taught her something real. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, a lesson from when she was 15 and afraid to compete in her first shooting match. Don't ever let anyone hand you a weapon unless you're prepared to show them what you can do with it. Emma's hand closed around the grip before her doubt could override her decision. The Mossberg felt different from her father's old Remington 870. Heavier, with a different balance point and an extended magazine tube that changed the weapon's handling characteristics. She tested the stock against her shoulder, familiarized herself with the safety location, checked the action with the kind of methodical precision that came from years of her father's training. Shotgun's about rhythm, she said, more to herself than to her audience. You don't fight the recoil, you ride it. Emma walked to the firing line with deliberate calm. Not theatrical slowness, but the measured pace of someone who understood that rushing led to mistakes. The 12 steel targets stretched out before her like a challenge course designed by someone who understood exactly how to test a shooter's fundamentals. At 20 yards, the first silhouette waited. Emma settled into her stance. Feet shoulder-width apart, strong side foot slightly back, weight distributed evenly. She pressed the stock firmly into her shoulder pocket, not just resting it there, but actually wedging it in place. Her support hand gripped the forearm with authority but not desperation. Her cheek found its weld on the stock with the kind of consistency that only came from thousands of repetitions. She took a breath, let half of it out, and found her natural respiratory pause. For just a moment, doubt crept in. What if she missed? What if 7 years of watching hadn't taught her as much as she thought? What if she was about to embarrass herself in front of 8 elite warriors? Then she heard her father's voice again, clear as if he were standing beside her. Trust your training, kiddo. The fundamentals don't lie. The first shot broke clean. The 20-yard silhouette rang like a bell and swung back on its hinge. Emma worked the pump smoothly, not fast but efficient, keeping the stock in her shoulder throughout the cycle. The second target at 25 yards fell just as cleanly. She was in the zone now, that place where conscious thought gave way to trained muscle memory. Pivot to 30 yards, acquire the target through the bead sight. Press the trigger straight back with the pad of her index finger. The popper fell backward with authority. Smooth pump cycle. Eject the spent hull. Chamber a fresh round, never breaking her shooting stance. Behind her, she could hear one of the SEALs mutter something appreciative, but she blocked it out. The course demanded all her attention now. At 40 yards, the range where Grant had started missing, Emma took an extra half-second to confirm her sight picture. The silhouette was smaller now, requiring more precision, but her fundamentals were solid. The shot broke and the target spun on its mount, clearly hit. She was halfway through the course now, and every shot had connected. But the real test was still coming. At 70 yards, the targets were barely larger than her thumb from the firing line. This was where technique separated the competent from the exceptional. The 50-yard target fell cleanly. Then the 55. Each success built her confidence but also increased the pressure. A perfect run was within reach, and that meant every remaining shot carried the weight of the entire demonstration. The 60-yard hostage target required surgical precision. The bad guy's silhouette was partially obscured by the hostage figure, leaving only a narrow window for a clean shot. Emma took her time, confirming her sight alignment, controlling her breathing, pressing the trigger with the kind of patience her father had drilled into her since childhood. The slug punched through the threat center mass, leaving the hostage untouched. 2 targets left, 70 yards, the absolute limit for effective shotgun work. Emma knew these shots were make or break. Everything that had come before was just qualification. This was where she'd either prove her competence or reveal the limits of her ability. She settled into position one final time. Stock welded to her shoulder, cheek pressed firmly against the comb, every element of her stance locked into perfect alignment. Through the bead sight, the distant target looked impossibly small, but she'd made this shot before with her father. Not under pressure, not with an audience, but she'd made it. The morning wind had picked up slightly. She could feel it on her left cheek. A crosswind from the right, maybe 3 to 5 miles per hour. At 70 yards with a slug, that was enough to matter. She adjusted her point of aim slightly left of center. The trigger broke like glass. 70 yards downrange, the silhouette spun on its pivot, clearly struck. One more shot, one more target. Emma worked the action, chambered her final round, and settled back into position. The last target seemed to mock her from the far end of the range, but she'd come too far to doubt herself now. Same wind correction, same sight picture, same controlled breathing. Breath control, sight alignment, trigger press. The final shot echoed across the range, and the distant target fell backward off its stand, clearly defeated. 12 shots, 12 hits, perfect score. Emma safed the weapon, opened the action, and stepped back from the firing line. The silence that followed wasn't awkward or heavy. It was the kind of quiet that came after something impressive had just happened. Then Bradford started clapping. Slow, deliberate applause that was quickly joined by the rest of his team. Even Grant was nodding, his earlier skepticism replaced by what looked like genuine respect. Bradford stepped forward, squinted down the range at the defeated targets and nodded once. Clean sweep. Every target, center mass. That's better shooting than half of us managed this morning. He turned back to Emma with something that might have been respect in his eyes. You teach. Emma shook her head. Just learned from my dad. Shot with him every weekend since I was 12. One of the other SEALs, stockier with gray at his temples, tilted his head and studied her more carefully. What you say your last name was? Cassidy. His eyebrows shot up. Your father wouldn't happen to be Jim Cassidy, would he? Used to run tactical training for Hayes County SWAT. Emma's heart skipped. She nodded. I'll be damned, the SEAL said, extending his hand. Chen, I trained with your dad back in '08. 3-week shotgun instructor rotation at Fort Bliss. That man was a legend. Could put 5 slugs through a playing card at 50 yards and still have time to fix your stance between shots. The dynamic in the group shifted immediately. Suddenly, Emma wasn't just some range tech who'd gotten lucky. She was Jim Cassidy's daughter, and apparently that meant something to these men. How's he doing? Chen asked, genuine concern in his voice. Good days and bad days, Emma replied carefully. The injury from Fallujah. Some days he can barely hold a coffee cup, but he still coaches me when he's feeling strong. Says it keeps his mind sharp. What happened? Bradford asked quietly. IED in '05. He was training Iraqi police when it went off. Took shrapnel in his right shoulder and back. Doctors said he was lucky to keep the arm. She trailed off, not wanting to get into the details of surgeries and physical therapy and medical bills that never seemed to end. Not wanting to mention the Parkinson's diagnosis, or the timeline the neurologist had given them, or the fact that her father was dying by inches, while she worked 3 jobs to keep him alive a little longer. Chen nodded with the understanding of someone who'd seen similar injuries. That why he left the job? Partly, Emma said. But honestly, I think he was ready anyway. He'd been doing tactical training for 15 years. When I got older, he said he'd rather spend his weekends teaching me than preparing for the next raid. Bradford was looking at her differently now. not as a range technician who'd gotten lucky, but as someone with legitimate pedigree. "So this isn't amateur hour," he said. "It's not official training," Emma replied. "I never went through instructor courses or got certified, just grew up around it. Dad had me loading shells before I could drive, running reload drills in the backyard, made me disassemble every weapon blindfolded before he'd let me shoot it." Chen chuckled. "Yeah, that sounds like Jim. Man didn't believe in shortcuts. I remember him making us do dry-fire drills for 2 hours before we ever touched live ammo. Said if you couldn't shoot the gun empty, you had no business loading it." "He used to tell me the same thing," Emma said, surprising herself by opening up to these strangers. "Said shooting was like surgery. You had to master the tools before you could trust yourself with the real thing." The team was listening now, really listening. Even Grant had lost his skeptical expression, replaced by something that looked like grudging interest. Bradford and Chen exchanged a meaningful look. There was some kind of silent communication happening between them, the kind that came from working together long enough to read each other's thoughts. "Miss Cassidy," Bradford said formally, "what would you say if I told you we might have a proposition for you?" Emma felt her stomach flutter. For the first time all morning, she thought about her student loans, her father's medical bills, the 36 more months of community college stretching ahead of her like a prison sentence. "What kind of proposition?" Instead of answering immediately, Bradford walked over to where his gear bag sat near the firing line. He pulled out a tablet, tapped the screen a few times, then walked back to her. "We don't work alone," he said. "We coordinate with a lot of different units and agencies. One of those is the Marine Corps Advanced Marksmanship Unit at Quantico. They're running an instructor selection next week, right here at Ironwood." He showed her the tablet screen. It displayed information about the selection process, requirements, timeline. Emma's eyes caught on one detail: lead instructor position, $95,000 annually. "The pay is good," Chen added, apparently reading her expression. "Better than range tech work anyway. And the Marine Corps is always looking for people who can diagnose problems and teach fundamentals." $95,000. Emma did the math automatically. That was more than she made in 2 years working all 3 of her jobs combined. That would solve every financial problem they had. Her father's medications, the physical therapy, the specialist appointments. It would let her finish her degree without working herself to exhaustion. It might even let her father see her graduate before he died. "I don't have any credentials," she said, the same objection that had lived in her head for years. Bradford smiled for the first time that day. "Lady, you just outshot a team of Navy SEALs with a weapon you'd never fired before. You diagnosed technique problems that we missed, then demonstrated the correct way to fix them. That's the only credential that matters." "The selection starts Monday," Chen added. 12 candidates, all active-duty Marines, 7 days of evaluation, 1 position. Emma's mind raced. Monday was 4 days away. She had classes. She had her shifts at the hardware store. She had her father's appointment with the neurologist that she'd already rescheduled twice. "I need to think about it," she said. Bradford nodded. "Fair enough. But if I may call you that." She nodded. "Your father saved Chen's life in Fallujah. Did you know that?" Emma looked at Chen, who met her eyes with something that might have been old pain. "I was 22 years old," Chen said quietly, "pinned down in a street with insurgents on 3 sides. Your father was our JTAC, wasn't even supposed to be in the fight. But when our squad leader went down, Jim grabbed a rifle and charged their position. Alone. Gave us time to extract the wounded." He paused, and Emma could see him living through the memory again. He took 17 pieces of shrapnel that day, should have died. They put him in for the Medal of Honor. He refused it twice, said he was just doing his job. Emma felt something tighten in her chest. Her father had never told her that story. She'd known about the Medal of Honor, had seen the case in his closet gathering dust, but he'd never explained what he'd done to earn it. "I owe your father my life," Chen continued. "Watching you work here, resetting targets while we train, feels wrong. You've got his gift, Em, and gifts like that shouldn't be wasted." Bradford extended his hand. "Think about it over the weekend. Wade has my contact information. If you decide you're interested, let him know by Sunday night, 1800 hours." Emma shook his hand, feeling the calluses that came from years of hard use, the grip that spoke of competence and confidence earned through action. The SEALs packed up their gear and prepared to continue their training on a different range. Emma stood alone on the shotgun course, surrounded by the targets she defeated, trying to process what had just happened. Wade appeared at her elbow. "Been a hell of a morning," he said. Emma didn't respond. She was staring at the distant 70-yard target, the one she'd hit with her final shot, the one that had sealed a perfect run she hadn't known she was capable of until the moment demanded it. "Your father would be proud," Wade said quietly. "My father is dying," Emma replied, "and I'm supposed to just leave him to chase some job I'm not qualified for." Wade lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and exhaled slowly. "You know what Jim told me when I asked if I could mention you for the selection?" Emma turned to look at him. He said, and I quote, "Emma's not mine to give permission for. She's 23 years old. She's put her life on hold long enough. If she wants to try, I won't stand in her way. And if she doesn't, that's her choice too. But I'll be damned if I let her use me as an excuse for playing small." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. "He called me last night," Wade continued. "Asked me to push you a little. Said you'd been living in his shadow for too long and it was time to see if you could cast your own." Emma's vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. "I have to get back to work," she said. Wade nodded. "I'll be in the office if you need anything." Emma spent the rest of the day in a haze, going through the motions of her job while her mind spun in circles. She reset targets, cleaned weapons, swept the ranges. Normal work on a day that felt anything but normal. When her shift ended at 5, she sat in her car for 15 minutes before starting the engine. The drive home felt longer than usual, every mile giving her more time to think, more time to doubt. Jim was in the kitchen when she arrived, trying to chop vegetables for dinner with hands that shook so badly he could barely hold the knife. Emma took it from him gently, finished the cutting herself, and got him settled at the table with a glass of water and his evening medications. They ate in silence, the way they had most nights for the past year. Conversation required energy that neither of them had in surplus. It wasn't until they were washing dishes that Jim finally spoke. "Hawkins called me today." Emma's hand stilled in the soapy water. "He's the Master Chief running the Marine selection at Wade's place next week. Used to be Chen back when I knew him. Good kid, became a good man." Emma didn't turn around. "He asked my permission to recruit you for the selection." "And what did you tell him?" Jim set down the dish towel. His hands were shaking worse than usual, tremor pronounced enough that Emma could see it from across the kitchen. "I told him you're not mine to give permission for. You're 23 years old. You've put your life on hold long enough for a dying old Marine." Emma spun to face him. "Don't say that." "Why not?" Jim's voice was gentle but firm. "It's true. I'm dying, Em. Have been since that IED went off in 2005. Could be tomorrow, could be 5 years from now. The timeline doesn't matter. What matters is that I didn't raise you to be my nursemaid. I'm your daughter, Emma said, and the tears she'd been holding back all day finally broke free. I'm supposed to take care of you. No, Jim said. You're supposed to live your own life. I've had mine, 28 years in the Corps, a career I loved, a daughter I'm proud of, and more good days than any man has a right to expect. But your life, that's just starting. And I'll be damned if I watch you throw it away because you think you owe me something. He crossed to her, took her face in his trembling hands. I trained you to be the best, Em. Not so you could hide behind me. Not so you could waste your talent resetting targets for $12 an hour. I trained you so that when the moment came, when someone handed you an opportunity, you'd be ready to take it. The selection, Emma whispered. 95,000 a year, Jim said. Teaching Marines at Quantico. Using everything I taught you to make other people better. Can you honestly tell me that's not what you want? Emma couldn't speak. The answer was lodged somewhere in her throat, too big and too true to force into words. I'm scared, she finally said. Good, Jim replied. That means it matters, but being scared and being incapable aren't the same thing. I've watched you shoot for 13 years. I've seen you grow from a kid who could barely hold a rifle to a woman who can outshoot Navy SEALs with weapons you've never touched before. He smiled, and for just a moment, Emma could see the man he'd been before the injuries, before the disease, before time and war had carved him down to this fragile shadow. You've got gifts, kiddo, real ones, and I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll at least try. Go to the selection. Give it your best shot. And if it doesn't work out, fine. Come home, finish your degree, live your life however you want. But don't hide from this because you're afraid of leaving me behind. Emma wrapped her arms around her father, feeling how thin he'd become, how the muscle had wasted away until he was mostly bone and determination. What if something happens while I'm gone? Then it happens, Jim said into her hair. But it'll happen whether you're here or not. The Parkinson's doesn't care about your schedule, so you might as well be out there doing something that matters. They stood like that for a long time, father and daughter, teacher and student, two people bound by blood and love, and the shared understanding that time was running out. Finally, Emma pulled back. She looked into her father's eyes, saw the pride there, the hope, the absolute conviction that she was capable of more than she believed. Okay, she said, I'll do it, I'll try. Jim's smile could have lit the whole state of Texas. That's my girl, he said. Now let's get you ready. We've got 4 days to make sure you're sharp. They spent the weekend in the garage, running drills the way they had when Emma was young. Dry fire exercises, stance work, breathing control. Jim's hands shook too badly to demonstrate anymore, but his eye was still sharp, his corrections still precise. Sunday evening, Emma called Wade and told him she was in. He gave her the details. Report to Ironwood at 0500 on Monday, prepared for 7 days of intensive evaluation. Bring nothing but what you'd take to the field. That night, Emma lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, heart racing with equal parts terror and anticipation. In less than 12 hours, she would step into a world she'd only observed from the outside. 12 active-duty Marines, all combat veterans, all competing for a position she had no business even attempting. But her father believed she could do it, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. She closed her eyes and heard his voice one last time, the lesson he'd taught her 1,000 times over the years. Shooting isn't about the gun, Em. It's about controlling yourself. Master yourself first. Everything else follows. Emma took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and felt her heartbeat settle into a steady rhythm. Monday morning was coming, and she would be ready. Monday morning arrived the way all reckoning days do, with a darkness that felt heavier than it should, and a silence that pressed against Emma's chest like a physical weight. She'd been awake since 3, staring at the ceiling of her childhood bedroom, listening to her father's labored breathing down the hall and wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. At 4:30, she gave up on sleep. The house was still dark when she moved through it, gathering the gear she'd prepared the night before. Tactical pants, moisture-wicking shirt, boots broken in over 3 years of range work, a small pack with water, protein bars, and the notebook her father had given her, the one filled with 13 years of his handwritten training notes. Jim was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table in the pre-dawn darkness. He didn't turn on the light. Didn't need to. They'd shared enough early mornings over the years to navigate by memory and habit. "Coffee's fresh," he said. His voice was rough with sleep and something else, something that sounded like pride mixed with fear. Emma poured herself a cup, added nothing, drank it black the way he'd taught her. The bitter heat centered her, gave her something to focus on besides the churning in her stomach. "You ready?" Jim asked. "No." "Good, if you were ready. You wouldn't be trying hard enough." He stood, moved to where she was leaning against the counter, and placed both trembling hands on her shoulders. Even with the Parkinson's making his grip unsteady, Emma could feel the strength there, the decades of discipline that disease couldn't quite erase. "Listen to me," he said. "You're going to walk into that selection, and you're going to see men who have been to war. Men with combat deployments and military credentials, and every reason to look down on a civilian college kid who maintains targets for $12 an hour." Emma started to speak, but Jim cut her off with a gentle shake. "Let them look down. Let them underestimate you. Because when the work starts, when they have to prove they can teach instead of just shoot, that's when you show them what 13 years of training with a Marine Corps legend actually means." "I'm scared, Dad." "I know, but being scared means you care. And caring means you'll fight harder than someone who thinks they've already won." He pulled her into an embrace, and Emma felt how thin he'd become, how the man who'd once carried a 100-pound pack through the mountains of Afghanistan now weighed less than she did. The disease was eating him from the inside, and they both knew it. The only question was how much time they had left. "Make me proud, kiddo," Jim whispered into her hair. "Not by winning, by trying." Emma held him for another moment, memorizing the feel of it, storing the memory like ammunition she'd need later. Then she pulled back, grabbed her pack, and headed for the door. The drive to Ironwood was 23 minutes in the early morning darkness, and Emma spent every one of them second-guessing her decision. She was 23 years old with an incomplete degree and 0 military experience. What the hell was she doing competing against Marines who'd earned their positions through blood and sacrifice? But then she'd remember her father's hands on her shoulders, his absolute conviction that she belonged in this fight, and she'd press down on the accelerator and keep driving. Ironwood's parking lot was already half full when she arrived at 04:45. Pickup trucks mostly, a few SUVs, all of them cleaner and newer than her battered Civic. She parked in the back corner, same spot she'd been using for 7 years, and sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. Through the windshield, she could see the other candidates gathering near the main building. Even in the dim light from the overhead floods, she could make them out. 11 men in various configurations of tactical casual, moving with the unconscious confidence of people who'd spent years in uniform, years earning the right to stand where they stood. Emma took a deep breath, grabbed her pack, and got out of the car. The walk from the parking lot to the main building felt like a mile. Every step brought her closer to the group, closer to the moment when they'd turn and see her, when she'd become visible and therefore vulnerable. She could already imagine their reactions. Confusion first, then skepticism, then the kind of dismissive assessment that came from men who'd been taught to trust combat experience over everything else. Wade Kruger was standing on the steps of the main building, clipboard in hand, cigarette burning despite the early hour and the doctor's warnings. He saw Emma approaching and nodded once, his version of encouragement. Master Chief Bradford stood beside him, looking exactly as Emma remembered from 5 days ago. Weathered, alert, carrying himself with the quiet authority of someone who'd led men through hell and brought most of them home. When he saw Emma, something flickered across his face. Not surprise, but satisfaction, like he'd been hoping she'd show up but hadn't been entirely sure she would. The other candidates had noticed her now. Emma felt their eyes tracking her approach, saw them exchanging glances, assessing and dismissing her in the space of a heartbeat. She was young, female, civilian. 3 strikes in a world that valued age, masculinity, and service above all else. One of them, a thick-shouldered man in his mid-30s with a high and tight haircut, elbowed his companion and said something Emma couldn't hear. They both laughed. Not cruel, exactly, but dismissive in the way men often were when they encountered women in spaces they considered their own. Emma kept walking. Let them laugh. Let them underestimate her. Her father had been right about that. She reached the bottom of the steps and looked up at Bradford. The Master Chief studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Glad you came, Cassidy." "Me too," Emma said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. Bradford checked his watch. 04:58, 2 minutes. He raised his voice enough to carry across the parking lot. "Candidates fall in." The 11 men moved with practiced efficiency, forming a loose line facing the building. Emma joined them at the end, acutely aware of being the youngest, the smallest, the only one without rank or service record. Bradford descended the steps, moving down the line with the slow deliberation of someone inspecting troops before deployment. He stopped in front of each candidate, made eye contact, said nothing. The silence was heavier than words. When he reached Emma, he held her gaze for 3 full seconds. She didn't look away, didn't flinch. Her father had taught her that the first rule of any confrontation was to refuse intimidation, and she'd learned that lesson well. Finally, Bradford stepped back and addressed the group. "My name is Master Chief Petty Officer Hawkins Bradford. For the next 7 days, I will be evaluating you for the position of lead instructor at Marine Corps Advanced Marksmanship Unit, Quantico, Virginia. Some of you have combat deployments. Some of you have instructor experience. Some of you have both." His eyes flicked to Emma on the word some, acknowledging without stating the obvious fact that she had neither. This selection is not about who shoots fastest or farthest. It's not about how many deployments you've had or how many ribbons you wear. This is about who can teach, who can diagnose problems in other shooters and fix them, who can take a Marine who's struggling and turn them into someone competent. He paused, letting that sink in. The Marine Corps doesn't need another trigger puller. We need someone who can build trigger pullers. Someone who can take the fundamentals we all think we know and break them down in a way that makes sense to a 19-year-old kid who's never held a rifle before. Bradford pulled out his clipboard. "We have 12 candidates. At the end of each day, at least one of you will be eliminated. The last person standing after 7 days gets Quantico, $95,000 a year, government benefits, the opportunity to shape the next generation of Marine Corps shooters." He looked up from the clipboard. "Questions?" The thick-shouldered man who'd laughed earlier raised his hand. Staff Sergeant Kevin Park, according to the name tape visible even in the dim light. Master Chief, with all due respect, why is there a civilian in this selection? Emma felt the eyes turn toward her again, but she kept her focus on Bradford. Because I invited her, Bradford said. His tone suggested the conversation was over, but Park pressed anyway. Sir, this is for a military instructor position. Shouldn't the candidates at least have served? Bradford's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. He moved toward Park with the slow deliberation of a man who dealt with insubordination in worse places than a Texas parking lot. Staff Sergeant Park, are you questioning my judgment? No, sir. Good, because Miss Cassidy is here at my personal invitation after she demonstrated shooting fundamentals that put most of my SEAL team to shame. She learned from Colonel Jim Cassidy, Marine Corps, retired, Medal of Honor recipient. And if you think growing up under the tutelage of one of the finest tactical instructors this country has ever produced doesn't count as qualification, then you're welcome to drop out right now and save us all some time. The parking lot went silent. Park's face had gone red, but he kept his mouth shut. Bradford turned back to address the full group. Anyone else have concerns about who belongs here? No one spoke. Outstanding. Now we start with diagnostic teaching. You'll each get 2 hours with a problem student. The student has scripted flaws. Your job is to identify those flaws and demonstrate the correct technique. We're not looking for how well you shoot. We're looking for how well you can break down complex movements into teachable components. He consulted his clipboard. First up, Captain Michael Brennan. Second, Gunnery Sergeant Rachel Torres. Third, Emma Cassidy. Emma felt her stomach drop. Third, she'd be teaching in less than 6 hours, demonstrating in front of 11 skeptical Marines and a Master Chief who'd served with her father. No pressure at all. The rest of you will observe, Bradford continued. Pay attention. You might learn something. And if you're smart, you'll take notes, because the teaching methods you see today might be the difference between making it through this week or going home early. He checked his watch again. 05:15. Captain Brennan, you're up in 30 minutes. Use that time to prepare however you see fit. The rest of you, get coffee, get your heads right, and be ready to learn. The group dispersed. Most of the candidates headed for the main building, probably to use the bathroom or grab food from the vending machines. Emma stayed where she was, watching the eastern horizon where the sun was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. Wade appeared at her elbow, materializing the way he always did, silent as smoke. You holding up okay? Ask me again in 6 hours. Your dad would be proud you showed up. Emma turned to look at the old Delta operator. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Concern, maybe, or the kind of worry that came from caring about someone who was about to walk into something hard. Master Chief Bradford, Emma said carefully. He's the same Hawk Hawkins from my dad's Fallujah story, isn't he? Wade nodded. Same man. Saved your father's life after Jim charged that insurgent position. Carried him 200 yards to the evac point with 17 pieces of shrapnel in him. Hawk's been carrying that debt ever since. So he invited me here because he owes my dad. Wade shook his head. He invited you here because you're good. The debt just gave him an excuse to break protocol and put a civilian in a military selection. The sun broke the horizon fully now, flooding the range with golden light. Emma could see the shooting courses stretched out behind the main building, the steel targets waiting like silent sentries, the whole complex looking both familiar and strange in the morning glow. I should go prepare, she said. Emma, Wade's voice stopped her. She turned back. Your father told me something once after a particularly bad op in Ramadi. We'd lost 2 men, nearly lost 3 more. I was beating myself up, thinking about everything I could have done different. You know what Jim said to me? What? He said, you can't control outcomes, Wade. You can only control effort. So give it everything, accept what comes, and live with yourself after. Wade crushed his cigarette under his boot. Give it everything today. That's all anyone can ask. Emma nodded, not trusting her voice, and headed inside. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of observation and mounting anxiety. Captain Brennan went first, working with a recruit who had severe flinching issues. Brennan's approach was methodical and professional, walking the student through breathing exercises and progressive exposure to recoil. Solid teaching, Emma thought, traditional but effective. Gunnery Sergeant Rachel Torres went second. Emma watched her work with fascination. Torres was the only other woman in the selection, 34 years old, with the lean, coiled build of a distance runner and the focused intensity of someone who'd fought for every inch of respect she'd earned. Her student had trigger slap issues, jerking the trigger instead of pressing smoothly. Torres fixed it with a combination of dry fire drills and brutal honesty that somehow didn't feel cruel. Then it was Emma's turn. The recruit waiting for her was young, maybe 20, with the nervous energy of someone who knew he was being used as a test subject. His name tag read Martinez, and his eyes kept darting to Emma with obvious confusion. He'd probably been expecting a grizzled instructor, not a woman who looked like she should still be in college. Bradford stood 30 feet away with his clipboard, watching. The other candidates had spread out around the range, some taking notes, others just observing with varying degrees of skepticism. Emma took a breath, let it out slow, and heard her father's voice in her head. You don't teach the gun, you teach the person holding it. Martinez, she said, tell me about your experience with firearms. The recruit blinked. Ma'am. Your experience, have you shot before? Growing up, maybe, family. He relaxed slightly. My uncle took me hunting a few times, deer mostly, used his old .30-06. Did you like it? Honestly, Martinez shrugged. I was terrible at it, missed every shot. Uncle said I flinched too much. Emma nodded. Okay, that's good information. Now I'm going to watch you shoot. Don't try to be perfect. Just show me what you normally do. She handed him the rifle, already loaded with 5 rounds, and stepped back. Martinez settled into what he probably thought was a proper shooting stance. Emma could already see the problems. His shoulders were hunched, his grip was too tight, and sure enough, when he fired the first shot, his whole body tensed in anticipation of the recoil. The shot went wide, so did the second. By the 5th round, Martinez was visibly frustrated. I told you I was terrible, he said. You're not terrible, Emma replied. You're scared. There's a difference. She could feel the other candidates watching, could practically hear them judging her approach. Most instructors would have started with stance corrections, with technical adjustments. Emma was starting with psychology. Let me ask you something, she said to Martinez. When you shot with your uncle, did he ever get frustrated with you? The recruit's expression clouded. Yeah, he'd yell sometimes, said I was wasting ammunition. And that made you more nervous? Martinez nodded. So every time you shoot now, part of your brain is waiting for someone to yell at you, waiting to fail, and your body tenses up trying to brace for that feeling. That's the flinch. It's not about the gun. It's about expecting punishment. Emma moved beside him, her voice dropping to something softer. But I'm not your uncle, and this isn't about whether you're good enough. This is about building a skill. Skills take time, so let's start with something simple. She had him put the rifle down. For the next 30 minutes, Emma worked with Martinez on breathing. Just breathing. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. She had him do it until his shoulders dropped, until the tension in his jaw released, until he stopped looking like he was waiting for someone to tell him he was doing it wrong. Only then did she bring the rifle back. This time she walked him through the mechanics, feet placement, hip position, how to create a stable platform from the ground up. She used her father's analogies, the ones that had made sense to her as a kid. Think of your body like architecture, she said. If the foundation shakes, the roof falls. So we build from the ground up. Solid base, solid structure. When Martinez finally fired again, the shot hit within 2 inches of center. His face lit up with surprise. How did I? You stopped fighting yourself, Emma said. That's all. The gun was always going to work. You just needed to get out of its way. By the end of the 2-hour session, Martinez was shooting consistent groups within 4 inches at 50 yards. Not perfect, but a dramatic improvement from where he'd started. More importantly, he was smiling. He looked like someone who discovered he could do something he'd thought was impossible. Bradford made notes on his clipboard but said nothing. Emma stepped back, released Martinez with thanks, and tried not to collapse from the adrenaline dump that followed. Her hands were shaking, not from fear now, but from the intensity of focus she'd maintained for 2 solid hours. The day continued. Staff Sergeant Park worked with his student and demonstrated solid fundamentals, but struggled to adapt when his initial approach didn't work. Several other candidates showed varying levels of competence, but Emma noticed they all shared a common flaw. They taught the way they'd been taught, using the methods that had worked on them, without considering whether those methods would work on everyone. Rachel Torres sought Emma out during a break. The gunnery sergeant had been watching her session with obvious interest. That was smart, Torres said without preamble, starting with the psychology instead of the mechanics. Just what my dad taught me, Emma replied. Your dad was Jim Cassidy. Emma nodded, bracing for the skepticism or the assumption that she was only here because of his reputation. Instead, Torres smiled. He trained my first platoon sergeant, best weapons instructor I ever worked with. He had this way of making complex things feel simple. That was his gift, Emma said quietly. Looks like it runs in the family. Before Emma could respond, Bradford called the group back together. The sun was setting now, painting the range in shades of orange and red. They'd been working for nearly 12 hours straight, and Emma felt it in every muscle. Bradford stood at the front of the assembled candidates, clipboard in hand. Day 1 complete, he said. You've all demonstrated varying levels of teaching ability. Some of you excelled. Some of you showed room for improvement. And some of you. He paused, letting the weight of that unfinished sentence hang in the air. Staff Sergeant Park, Captain Williams, you're eliminated. Thank you for your time. The 2 men's faces went carefully neutral, the way military personnel learn to mask disappointment. They gathered their gear and left without argument. The Marine Corps didn't tolerate public displays of emotion, especially not from men who just failed a selection. The remaining candidates, 10 now instead of 12, stood a little straighter. Emma felt the shift in atmosphere. This was real. People were going home. The competition wasn't theoretical anymore. Tomorrow, Bradford continued, we escalate. Live fire under stress. You'll be shooting qualification courses while we create chaos around you. Loud noises, physical contact, time pressure. This tests your ability to maintain composure when everything's going wrong. He looked directly at Emma when he said the next part. At some point tomorrow, each of you will face a scenario designed to break you. A piece of information calculated to destroy your focus. Your job is to complete the mission anyway. Because in combat, in training, in life, the mission doesn't stop just because you get bad news. Dismissed. Be here at 0500 tomorrow. The candidates dispersed. Emma walked to her car on legs that felt like water, collapsed into the driver's seat, and sat there for 10 minutes before she trusted herself to drive. Her phone buzzed, a text from Jim. "How'd it go?" Emma stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. "Still here, made it through day one." The response came immediately. "Proud of you, now come home and tell me everything." The drive back felt shorter than the morning trip had. Emma's mind was still processing the day, replaying her session with Martinez, analyzing what she'd done right and what she could improve. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed her father sitting on the front porch, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm evening. He'd been waiting for her, probably since the moment she'd left that morning. Emma parked and climbed the porch steps. Jim looked up at her with eyes that were still sharp despite everything the disease had taken from him. "Tell me," he said. So Emma told him. About Bradford's opening speech, about Staff Sergeant Park's challenge, about working with Martinez, and the moment when the recruit's face had lit up with understanding. She told him about Rachel Torres and the two men who'd been eliminated, and the way her hands had shaken after her teaching session ended. Jim listened without interrupting, the way he always had, giving her his complete attention even though she could see the effort it took to stay focused through the pain and the tremors. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You taught him to stop fighting himself," Jim said finally. "That's the hardest lesson to learn. Most people spend their whole lives at war with themselves and never figure out that's the real enemy." "Did I do okay?" "Emma," Jim's voice was gentle but firm. "Two people got eliminated today. You weren't one of them. I'd say you did better than okay. Tomorrow's going to be harder." "Of course it is. That's how selections work. They escalate until you break or until you prove you can't be broken." He reached out with his trembling hand and took hers. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever they throw at you, remember this. You've already survived the hardest thing you'll face in that selection." "What's that?" "Showing up despite being terrified. Everything after that is just details." Emma squeezed his hand gently, careful of the fragile bones beneath papery skin. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, kiddo. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow you show them what Jim Cassidy's daughter can really do." Emma went inside, ate the dinner her father had somehow managed to prepare despite his condition, and went to bed early. But sleep was a long time coming. She lay in the darkness thinking about Martinez's smile, about Staff Sergeant Park's dismissal, about the 9 days still stretching ahead of her like a minefield she had to cross one careful step at a time. Somewhere around midnight, she finally drifted off. And when she did, she dreamed of her father in his prime, young and strong and whole, teaching her to shoot in their backyard while the sun set over Texas, and the future felt like something bright and full of promise, instead of something that was running out like sand through an hourglass. Morning came too soon, as it always did, and Emma Cassidy rose to meet it the way her father had taught her. Not with confidence or certainty, but with the simple discipline of showing up and doing the work regardless of how she felt. Because that's what warriors did. And whether the Marine Corps recognized it yet or not, she was her father's daughter. Which meant she was a warrior too. Day 2 began the same way Day 1 had ended, with Emma staring at her ceiling in the darkness and wondering how much her body could take before it simply gave out. Every muscle ached from the tension of yesterday's teaching session, from holding herself together while 11 skeptical Marines watched her every move, waiting for her to fail. But she hadn't failed. 2 men had gone home and she was still here. Jim was already awake when she came downstairs at 4:30. He sat at the kitchen table with his morning medications arranged in front of him like ammunition. 7 different pills in 7 different colors, each one fighting a losing battle against the disease that was eating him alive. His hands shook worse today. It took him 3 tries to pick up the first pill. Emma moved to help, but he waved her off with a sharp gesture that said more than words could. He didn't want help, didn't want pity, just wanted to maintain the illusion of independence for as long as his body would allow it. She poured coffee instead, set a cup in front of him, and watched him struggle with the pills until they were all down. The silence between them was comfortable, the kind that came from 2 people who'd spent so many mornings together that conversation became optional. "Bradford called last night," Jim said finally, "after you went to bed." Emma's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. What did he want? To tell me what he's planning for today. Professional courtesy, he called it, man to man. And Jim's eyes met hers, and Emma saw something there she didn't like. Concern, maybe even fear. "He's going to test you, Em. Really test you. Said he needs to know if you can handle bad news in the middle of a mission." Emma felt cold spread through her chest. What kind of bad news? The kind that matters. The kind that makes you want to quit everything and go home. Jim reached across the table with his trembling hand and took hers. His grip was weak but steady, anchored by will more than strength. "Whatever he tells you today, whatever happens, you remember something for me. I'm proud of you. Not for making it through, not for being good at this. I'm proud of you for trying. That's all that matters, the trying." "Dad, you're scaring me." "Good, fear keeps you sharp. Just don't let it make you quit." The drive to Ironwood felt different this morning. Yesterday had been about nerves and anticipation. Today was about dread, about knowing that something bad was coming but not knowing what form it would take. The parking lot was fuller than before. 9 candidates instead of 12, but also additional vehicles Emma didn't recognize. Support staff, maybe. Evaluators. People whose job it was to create the chaos Bradford had promised. Rachel Torres was already there, stretching against her truck. She nodded to Emma, a gesture of acknowledgement between the only 2 women in a selection full of men who still weren't sure they belonged. "You ready for today?" Torres asked. "Does anyone ever feel ready?" "Fair point." Torres finished her stretch and stood up straight. "For what it's worth, your session yesterday was solid. Best teaching I saw all day." "Coming from you, that means something." Torres smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just remember, whatever they throw at us today, the only way out is through." The candidates assembled at 0500 sharp. Bradford was there, along with Wade and 3 other men Emma didn't recognize. Former military by the look of them, probably brought in specifically for today's scenarios. Bradford didn't waste time on pleasantries. Day 2. Live fire under stress. You'll each run a qualification course while we simulate combat conditions. Explosions, physical contact, time pressure, and at least one piece of information designed to destroy your focus. He paused, making eye contact with each candidate. In combat, bad things happen. People die. Missions fail. Equipment breaks. And you don't get to stop fighting just because you're scared or sad or angry. You complete the mission and you process the emotion later. Today, we find out if you can do that. One of the candidates, a captain named Brennan, raised his hand. "Master Chief, are these simulated casualties or real information?" Bradford's expression didn't change. "Does it matter? If I tell you your mother's in the hospital, your brain doesn't care if it's real or simulated. The stress response is the same. The question is whether you can function through it. No one else had questions. First up, Captain Brennan. Tours, your second. Cassidy, your third. Emma's stomach dropped. Third again. She'd be shooting in less than 2 hours with whatever nightmare scenario Bradford had designed specifically to break her. The morning turned into an education in controlled chaos. Brennan went first, running a tactical course while Bradford's assistant set off flashbang simulators, grabbed him during reloads, and shouted contradictory commands. Halfway through, Bradford stopped him. "Captain Brennan, your exec officer just took an RPG. He's dead. Continue the course." Emma watched Brennan's face go carefully blank, the way military men learn to suppress emotion. He completed the course with mechanical efficiency, but something had changed. The fluidity was gone, replaced by rigid automation. When he finished, Bradford made notes but said nothing. Tors went second. She handled the physical chaos better than Brennan, moving through the grabbing hands and explosions with the kind of efficiency that came from actual combat experience. But when Bradford delivered her bad news, Emma saw the gunnery sergeant stumble. "Tors, your team just took casualties. 3 wounded, 1 critical. You need to call for evac and continue engaging." Tors froze for maybe 2 seconds. In a competition, 2 seconds was an eternity. She recovered, completed the course, but her final time was 15 seconds slower than it should have been. Then it was Emma's turn. The course was set up in the tactical bay, a maze of barriers and targets designed to simulate urban combat. 12 shooting positions, each requiring a different weapon or shooting position. Rifle, pistol, shotgun. Standing, kneeling, prone. Emma checked her weapons, loaded her magazines, and moved to the starting position. Behind her, she could hear Bradford's assistants preparing their chaos. Flashbangs, smoke grenades, whatever else they decided would simulate the stress of combat. Bradford's voice cut through the morning air. "Cassidy, you ready?" "Ready, Master Chief." "Then begin." Emma moved through the course with the kind of focus that shut out everything except the immediate task. Target, sight picture, trigger press. Move, reload, acquire next position. The fundamentals her father had drilled into her for 13 years took over, turning conscious thought into automatic response. The first flashbang went off 20 feet to her left. Loud enough to hurt, bright enough to make her eyes water, but she'd been expecting it. Didn't flinch. Acquired her target and fired. Someone grabbed her arm during a reload. Hard grip, pulling her off balance. Emma twisted with the pull instead of fighting it, used the momentum to complete her magazine change faster than she would have standing still. Smoke grenades filled the course with thick white fog. Emma moved through it using the mental map she'd built during her initial walkthrough, trusting her memory more than her eyes. She was halfway through the course, shooting better than she'd ever shot in her life, when Bradford's voice cut through the chaos. "Cassidy, stop." Emma froze, finger off the trigger, weapon pointed in a safe direction. Her heart was hammering from adrenaline and exertion. Bradford walked toward her through the smoke, his face unreadable. "We just got a call from Travis County Medical. Your father collapsed at home. Ambulance is taking him in now. He's unconscious. They don't know if he's going to make it." The world tilted. Emma heard the words, but they didn't make sense, couldn't make sense. She'd just seen him 2 hours ago. He'd been fine. Tired, yes. Sick, yes, but fine. "Continue the course," Bradford said. His voice was flat, emotionless, the tone of someone delivering orders that needed to be followed regardless of how they felt. Emma's hands started to shake, not from fear or exertion but from the fundamental wrongness of what Bradford was asking. Her father was dying, might already be dead, And this man wanted her to keep shooting at steel targets like it mattered, like anything mattered more than getting to the hospital right now. "Is this real?" Emma's voice came out hoarse. Bradford's expression didn't change. In combat, you don't get to ask that question. You get information and you make a decision. Do you continue the mission or do you quit? Emma looked down at the rifle in her hands, looked at the remaining 6 targets she needed to engage, looked back at Bradford's implacable face. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, clear as if he were standing beside her. "Whatever he tells you today, whatever happens, you remember something for me. The trying is what matters." Emma took a breath, let it out, felt something settle in her chest, something hard and cold and absolutely certain. Continuing, she said. The next 6 positions passed in a blur. Emma moved through them with a focus so intense it felt like rage, like grief, like every emotion compressed into a single point of absolute concentration. She didn't think about her father in a hospital bed, didn't think about whether Bradford was telling the truth or lying as part of the test, didn't think about anything except the next target, the next shot, the next step. When she engaged the final target and Bradford called time, Emma stood there with the rifle still shouldered, breathing hard, eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. "Clear and safe," Bradford ordered. Emma cleared her weapon with mechanical precision, opened the action, showed clear, set the rifle down. Then she turned to face Bradford with something that might have looked like fury on anyone who hadn't learned to control their expression. Was it real? Her voice was quiet but carried an edge that could cut glass. Bradford held her gaze for 3 seconds, then he shook his head. "No, your father's fine. I called him before you ran the course. He's at home, probably drinking coffee and waiting to hear how you did." The relief hit Emma so hard she had to lock her knees to stay standing. Her vision swam. Her hands, which had been steady through the entire course, started to shake uncontrollably. "But you handled it," Bradford continued. "You got information that would break most people and you kept moving. That's what we needed to see." He made notes on his clipboard, then looked back at her. "Your time was 2 minutes 43 seconds. That's 18 seconds faster than Captain Brennan and 12 seconds faster than Gunnery Sergeant Torres. You shot perfect score under conditions that would make most Marines fall apart." Emma didn't feel triumphant, didn't feel proud. She felt hollowed out, scraped clean, like someone had reached inside her chest and carved away everything except the bare minimum required to keep functioning. "Can I call him?" she asked quietly. "After we're done for the day. Right now, I need you to watch the remaining candidates so you can see how they handle what you just went through." Emma nodded numbly and moved to the observation area. She stood there for the next 3 hours, watching 6 more Marines run the course, watching Bradford deliver customized bad news to each of them. Death of a parent, death of a child, spouse asking for divorce. Each piece of information calculated to hit the exact pressure point that would hurt most. Some handled it well, most didn't. 2 candidates completely fell apart, unable to continue after receiving their bad news. They were eliminated immediately, sent home before the day even finished. By the time the last candidate completed his run, only 7 remained. 7 out of 12 who'd started Monday morning. Emma felt the weight of that attrition, felt the selection getting more real with each person who went home. Bradford dismissed them at 1400 hours. 6 hours of controlled trauma, designed to find the breaking points in each candidate and then test whether they could function past them. Emma made it to her car before the shakes got so bad she had to sit down. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands and called her father. He answered on the second ring. "How'd it go, kiddo?" Emma started crying. Couldn't help it. The stress of the day, the fear when Bradford had delivered his fake bad news, the relief of knowing it wasn't real, all of it came pouring out in gasping sobs that she couldn't control. Jim's voice sharpened with concern. Emma, what happened? She told him everything. About the course, about Bradford's test, about the moment when she'd thought he was dying and had chosen to finish the mission anyway. When she finished, Jim was quiet for a long moment. Bradford called me this morning, he said finally. Asked permission to use me as your pressure point. I told him yes. Emma's tears stopped. You knew. I knew, and I told him to make it realistic. Told him you needed to feel what it's like to get the worst news possible and keep moving anyway. Why? Emma's voice broke on the word. Because that's the job, Em. Teaching isn't just about range time and fundamentals. It's about standing in front of Marines who are about to deploy to places where people die. It's about knowing that some of those kids won't come home, and you have to teach them anyway. You have to give them the best chance you can, and then watch them walk into danger. Jim took a shaky breath. I've lost students, Emma. Good kids who did everything right and still didn't make it home. And every time it happened, I had to keep teaching. Had to take the next class, train the next group, knowing that some of them might not come back either. He paused. Bradford needed to know if you could handle that. If you could get the worst possible news and still complete the mission. And you did. So yeah, I gave him permission to put you through hell. Because better to find out now if you can handle it than to find out later when real lives are on the line. Emma leaned her forehead against the steering wheel. I thought you were dead, Dad. I know, I'm sorry, but you kept moving, that's what matters. I don't know if I can do this for 5 more days. Yes, you can, because you're Jim Cassidy's daughter, and Cassidys don't quit. Emma drove home in a daze, operating on autopilot while her mind tried to process what had happened. She'd been tested today in ways she hadn't imagined, pushed past limits she hadn't known she had, and somehow she'd survived. But the cost of that survival was still echoing through her body, manifesting in shaking hands and a hollow feeling in her chest that wouldn't quite go away. Jim was waiting on the porch again when she pulled up. He looked smaller than he had this morning, more fragile, like the phone call from Bradford had cost him something too. Emma climbed the steps slowly and sat beside him. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. 7 left, Jim said finally. You're in the top 7 out of 12. That's not luck, Em, that's skill. 2 more days, and they'll eliminate 3 more people. Then it's just 4 of us for the final challenges. And you'll be one of those 4. You don't know that. Jim turned to look at her with eyes that had seen more than most people could imagine, eyes that held absolute certainty. I do know it, because I know what you're made of, and so does Bradford, or he wouldn't have pushed you that hard today. Inside, Emma's phone buzzed, a text from Wade. Master Chief wants to see you tomorrow morning at 0400, before the other candidates arrive. Come alone. Emma showed the message to Jim. He read it and nodded slowly. That's good. That means he wants to talk to you off the record, might be offering guidance, might be warning you about what's coming. Or might be telling me I'm out. If he was cutting you, he'd do it in front of the group. This is something else. Emma spent that evening in a strange state of exhausted alertness, too tired to do anything productive but too wired to sleep. She tried to study her father's old training notes, but the words blurred together. Tried to eat but couldn't taste anything. Finally, she gave up and went to bed early, knowing that sleep wouldn't come but needing to at least rest her body. She was right. Sleep didn't come. She lay in the darkness listening to her father's breathing down the hall, thinking about Bradford's test, about the moment when she'd believed her father was dying and had chosen the mission anyway. What did that make her? Dedicated or heartless? Strong or damaged? She didn't have answers, only questions that circled through her mind like vultures waiting for something to die. At 0330, Emma gave up on sleep entirely. She dressed in the darkness, moved through the silent house, and drove to Ironwood under a sky still black with night. Bradford's truck was already there when she arrived at 0350. He was standing outside the main building, coffee cup in hand, looking like a man who'd spent too many early mornings in worse places than a Texas shooting range. "Cassidy," he said as she approached, "thanks for coming early." "You asked me to, Master Chief." "I did." Bradford gestured toward the building. "Let's talk inside." They sat in Wade's office, the space still smelling of cigarette smoke and gun oil despite Wade's attempts to air it out. Bradford set his coffee down and looked at Emma with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Something that's not part of the official selection, but something you need to know anyway." "Okay." "Your father saved my life in Fallujah. You probably know that already. But what you don't know is that I've been carrying that debt for 18 years, carrying it like a weight I can't put down." Emma stayed quiet, sensing this was a story that needed to be told without interruption. "When we found out about the instructor selection happening at Ironwood, I called your dad, asked him if he knew anyone who might be qualified. He told me about you. Said you could shoot better than anyone he'd trained except himself, but you'd never competed because you didn't think you were good enough." Bradford picked up his coffee, took a sip. "I came to observe you at the range. Watched you work for 3 days without you knowing I was there. Saw how you moved, how you handled weapons, how you analyzed other shooters. And I saw something your father saw, potential, raw talent that hadn't been tested yet." He set the cup down. "So I created a situation where I could see you shoot. Brought my team, let young Grant make a fool of himself, waited for you to speak up. And when you did, when you took that shotgun and ran a perfect course, I knew your father was right." Emma felt something shift in her chest. "You set that up." "I created the opportunity. You seized it. There's a difference." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because tomorrow's day 3. The eliminations get harder from here, and I need you to understand something before we continue." Bradford leaned forward, his weathered face serious. "I didn't put you in this selection because I owe your father. I put you here because you're good enough to be here, and I'm pushing you harder than the others because I think you can handle it." Emma felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. "Yesterday's test," Bradford continued, "that wasn't about breaking you. It was about showing you what you're capable of when everything goes to hell. Most people fold under that kind of pressure. You didn't. You kept moving." He stood up. "Today's challenges will be different. Physical endurance combined with teaching. You'll run classes for 6 hours straight, back to back, no breaks. It tests whether you can maintain quality instruction when you're exhausted." "That doesn't sound as bad as yesterday." "It's worse in different ways. Yesterday tested your emotional resilience. Today tests whether teaching is just a skill or if it's something you actually care about. Because when you're tired enough, the truth comes out. If you're just here for the paycheck, it'll show. If you actually give a damn about making people better, that'll show too." Emma nodded slowly. "Understood, Master Chief." "Good, now get some coffee and get your head right. The others will be here in 45 minutes, and when they arrive, this conversation never happened." Emma stood to leave, but Bradford's voice stopped her at the door. "One more thing, Cassidy." She turned back. "Your father's proud of you. He told me so yesterday when I called to clear the test scenario. Said watching you fight through this selection was worth more to him than any medal or commendation he ever earned. Bradford's expression softened slightly. Make sure he gets to see you finish it. Win or lose, make sure he sees you cross that finish line. I will, Master Chief. Emma left the office with her mind spinning. Everything she'd thought she knew about the selection had just shifted. Bradford hadn't just invited her. He'd orchestrated the circumstances that led to her invitation. He'd tested her not to break her but to show her what she was capable of. And he was pushing her harder than the others, because he believed she could take it. The other candidates started arriving at 0430. Rachel Torres nodded to Emma in passing. The remaining male candidates, 5 of them now, moved through their pre-training routines with the mechanical efficiency of men who'd done this enough times to make it automatic. At 0500 sharp, Bradford assembled the group. Day 3, Teaching Endurance. Each of you will instruct 6 one-hour classes back to back. Your students will be actual Marines from the local reserve unit. They're here to learn, and you're here to teach them something valuable despite being exhausted. He looked at each candidate in turn. This tests whether you can maintain quality when quantity is demanded, whether you can care about student number 6 as much as you cared about student number 1. Because in the real job, you don't get to call timeout when you're tired. You teach until the day ends and then you come back and do it again. The day turned into a marathon of instruction. Emma drew first shift, teaching basic pistol fundamentals to a group of young Marines who'd never handled a sidearm before. She walked them through grip, stance, sight alignment, making sure each one understood the why before moving to the how. Hour 2 was rifle marksmanship. Hour 3, shotgun fundamentals. By hour 4, Emma's voice was getting hoarse and her feet ached from standing on concrete. But the Marines in front of her were learning, asking good questions, showing improvement, and that mattered more than her discomfort. Hour 5, she taught failure drills. Malfunction clearing, immediate action, getting a weapon back in the fight when everything went wrong. The Marines were getting tired too, making mistakes they hadn't made earlier. Emma adjusted her teaching pace, slowed down, repeated key points, made sure they got it right even if it took longer. Hour 6, advanced shooting positions. Urban prone, barricade work, unconventional shooting platforms. Emma was running on fumes now, operating purely on discipline and the muscle memory of 13 years watching her father teach these same skills. When Bradford finally called time, Emma's legs nearly buckled. 12 hours of instruction, 6 different groups, dozens of individual Marines who'd come to learn and left knowing more than they had before. She looked around at the other candidates. Most of them looked as exhausted as she felt. Torres was sitting on the ground with her back against a wall, eyes closed. One of the male candidates had actually fallen asleep standing up, swaying slightly until his teammate elbowed him awake. Bradford walked among them, studying faces, making notes. Captain Brennan, Corporal Hayes, you're eliminated. Good effort, but your instruction quality dropped significantly after hour 3. This job requires consistency all day, every day. 2 more gone, 5 candidates left. Emma, Torres, and 3 men whose names she'd learned over the past 3 days. Park, Anderson, Chen. The final 4 plus 1. Tomorrow, someone else would go home, and then it would be just 4 candidates competing for one position over the final 4 days. Emma drove home in a fog of exhaustion so complete she barely remembered the trip. Jim was in the kitchen when she arrived, having somehow managed to make dinner despite hands that could barely hold a fork. They ate in silence, both too tired for conversation. But after the dishes were done and Emma was heading for bed, Jim caught her arm. "Bradford called me tonight," he said. "Told me what he told you this morning." "Dad, he set this up for you, Em. Created the opportunity. Because he believes in you the same way I do." Jim pulled her into a hug, his thin arms surprisingly strong. "Two more people went home today. You're still here, still fighting. That's all I ever wanted for you, to see you fight for something that matters." Emma held her father and felt the truth of what he was saying settle into her bones. She was still here, still in the fight, and tomorrow she'd get up and do it all again. Because that's what Cassidy's did. They endured. The phone call came at 2:17 in the morning on day 4. Emma jerked awake from a dream she couldn't remember, heart already pounding before her conscious mind registered the sound. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen illuminating her dark room with cold blue light. Wade's name on the caller ID. Range supervisors didn't call at 2 in the morning unless something was very, very wrong. "Emma," Wade's voice was tight. "I need you to stay calm." "What happened?" "It's your dad. Neighbor heard a crash, called 911. Paramedics just left with him. They're taking him to Travis County Medical." This time it wasn't a test. This time it was real. Emma was in her car 4 minutes later, still wearing the t-shirt she'd slept in, driving through empty streets with her hazard lights flashing. The hospital was 19 minutes away. She made it in 12. Jim was in the emergency room when she arrived, conscious but barely. His face had the gray pallor of someone whose body was shutting down in increments, systems failing one by one like lights going out in a house that was slowly being abandoned. A doctor intercepted Emma before she could reach him. Young, tired, wearing the kind of expression that said he'd delivered bad news so many times it had worn grooves into his face. "Miss Cassidy." "How bad?" The doctor glanced at his tablet. "Your father had a major seizure. We believe it's related to the progression of his Parkinson's, possibly combined with a minor stroke. We've stabilized him for now, but his vitals are weak." "Can I see him?" "Of course, but Miss Cassidy, you should prepare yourself. His condition is deteriorating faster than we anticipated. We're looking at weeks, possibly days." The words hit Emma like physical blows. Weeks, possibly days. Not the 6 months the neurologist had estimated. Not enough time to finish the selection, start the job, give her father the gift of seeing her succeed. Just enough time to watch him die. Jim's eyes opened when Emma entered his room. They were still sharp despite everything else that was failing, still holding that peculiar mix of strength and sorrow that had defined him since the day the IED had torn his body apart in Fallujah. "Hey kiddo," he managed. His voice was thin, stretched tight over pain he was trying to hide. "Sorry about the drama." Emma pulled a chair close to his bed, took his trembling hand in both of hers. "Don't apologize. Just tell me what you need." "I need you to go back to the selection." Emma's throat closed. "Dad, I can't just leave you here." "Yes, you can. You have to." Jim's grip tightened with surprising strength. "Day 4 starts in 3 hours. If you're not there, you're eliminated. Everything you've worked for, everything we've worked for, it's gone. None of that matters if you're dying." "I'm dying either way, Em. Been dying for years. But this selection, this opportunity, it only happens once. And I'll be damned if I'm the reason you throw it away." Emma felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. "How can you ask me to leave you?" "Because I'm not asking as your patient. I'm ordering you as your instructor." Jim's voice gained strength, pulled up from some reserve of will that disease hadn't yet touched. You've got 3 days left. 3 days to prove you belong in that position. And I'm going to be right here when you get back. What if you're not? The question hung between them like smoke. Then you finish anyway, Jim said quietly, because that's what I trained you to do. Finish the mission no matter what. A nurse entered to check vitals, giving Emma an excuse to step into the hallway. She leaned against the wall, shaking, trying to process what her father was asking. Go back to the selection while he lay in a hospital bed, possibly hours from death. Keep competing, keep teaching, keep pretending that everything was fine while the most important person in her life slipped away. It was insane, impossible, exactly the kind of thing Jim Cassidy would demand. Emma pulled out her phone and called Wade. He answered immediately. How is he? Alive, barely. Emma took a shaky breath. He wants me to come back to the selection. Wade was quiet for a moment. What do you want? I want my father not to be dying. I want to turn back time to before the IED, before the Parkinson's, before any of this. But since I can't have that, I don't know what I want. Your father's a stubborn old Marine, Wade said. If he's telling you to come back, it's because he means it, and because he knows something you don't. What's that? That watching you quit would hurt him worse than dying. Emma stayed at the hospital until 4:30, sitting with her father, memorizing the sound of his breathing, the feel of his hand in hers, the way he looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. At 4:40, Jim opened his eyes again. You're still here, he said. That means you're not at Ironwood. That means you're choosing me over the mission. There was no accusation in his voice, just statement of fact. I can't leave you, Emma whispered. You already have. You left the moment you decided to try this selection. All you're doing now is coming back, and that's not what I taught you. Jim struggled to sit up slightly, wincing with the effort. I spent 13 years training you to be strong enough to do hard things. This is a hard thing, Em. Probably the hardest thing I'll ever ask you to do, but I'm asking anyway. Emma stood abruptly, unable to sit still with the weight of what he was demanding. Outside the window, the sun was starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Day 4 was beginning, whether she was ready for it or not. If I go back, Emma said slowly, and something happens to you while I'm gone, I'll never forgive myself. Yes, you will, because I'm giving you permission right now. Jim's voice was firm despite his weakness. You didn't make me sick. You didn't make me old. These things are happening regardless of where you are or what you're doing, so you might as well be doing something that matters. He took a labored breath. I've lived a full life, Emma. 28 years in the Corps, a daughter I'm proud of, and more good days than most men get. But your life is just starting. And I need to know that when I'm gone, you're not going to use me as an excuse to play small. Emma turned back to face him, tears finally spilling over despite her best efforts. How do I do this? How do I just walk away? The same way I walked into that kill zone in Fallujah. Jim's eyes held hers. You decide the mission matters more than your fear, and then you move. At 0500 exactly, Emma walked onto the grounds of Ironwood Tactical Range. She'd driven straight from the hospital, hadn't showered, hadn't changed clothes, was running on zero sleep and determination that felt as fragile as spider silk. The 4 remaining candidates were already assembled. Rachel Torres, Kevin Park, Michael Anderson, David Chen. They turned when Emma approached, and she saw the questions in their faces. Where had she been? Why did she look like hell? Was she even going to make it through the day? Bradford stood at the front, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable. His eyes met Emma's and held for 3 seconds. In that brief exchange, Emma saw that he knew. Somehow, he knew exactly where she'd been and what choice she'd made by coming here. Day 4, Bradford began without preamble. Advanced problem solving. You'll each receive a student with multiple fundamental flaws. Your job is to diagnose all of them, prioritize which to fix first, and demonstrate measurable improvement within 2 hours. He paused. This tests whether you can see the whole picture instead of just the obvious problems. Because in the real world, students don't come with labels saying exactly what's wrong. You have to figure it out yourself. The candidates drew lots for order. Emma pulled number 3, again. Kevin Park went first. His student had issues with grip, stance, and breathing, all of which Park identified correctly. But he tried to fix everything at once, overwhelming the student with information. By the end of 2 hours, the Marine had improved slightly but was clearly confused about which corrections to prioritize. Rachel Torres went second. She demonstrated the kind of systematic problem solving that came from actual combat experience, addressing issues in order of importance. Her students showed marked improvement, though Torres herself looked exhausted. She'd been up all night too, Emma realized. They all had. This selection was taking its toll on everyone. Then it was Emma's turn. The Marine waiting for her was young, maybe 21, with the nervous energy of someone who'd been told he was bad at something and believed it. His name tape read Sullivan, and his eyes kept darting to Emma with obvious uncertainty. Sullivan, Emma said, and her voice came out rougher than intended. She cleared her throat, tasting coffee and exhaustion. Show me what you normally do. She handed him a rifle and stepped back, swaying slightly. Her vision blurred at the edges. 3 hours of sleep in the past 48. Her body was running on adrenaline and the kind of determination that came from knowing her father was counting on her to finish. Sullivan's shooting was a disaster. He jerked the trigger, couldn't maintain consistent sight picture, and flinched so badly before each shot that Emma could see it from 10 feet away. But underneath all that, she noticed something else. The way he held the rifle suggested someone who'd learned from YouTube videos instead of qualified instruction. Self-taught, self-doubting, and carrying every bad habit that came from learning in isolation. Emma made Sullivan run through 3 magazines while she watched. Didn't correct him, didn't interrupt, just observed. Her legs ached from standing. Her eyes felt like they'd been rubbed with sandpaper. But she forced herself to focus, to see past her own exhaustion to the patterns in Sullivan's shooting. Finally, she had him safe the weapon and face her. "Who taught you to shoot?" Emma asked. Sullivan shifted uncomfortably. "Nobody, really. I watched videos online, tried to figure it out myself." "And everyone told you that you were terrible at it." "Pretty much." Emma nodded, then had to blink hard as her vision swam. "Okay, that's actually good news." Sullivan looked confused. "How is that good news?" "Because you don't have bad habits from being taught wrong. You have bad habits from teaching yourself based on incomplete information. That's easier to fix." She spent the next 30 minutes not touching the rifle at all. Instead, she had Sullivan close his eyes and visualize the perfect shot. Had him walk through the mental process of breathing, sight alignment, trigger control. Built the neural pathways in his brain before trying to translate them to physical action. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she demonstrated, not just from her father's Parkinson's running in the family, but from exhaustion so profound it felt like her bones were dissolving. She'd been awake for 22 hours straight, had driven to a hospital, sat with her dying father, driven back, and was now expected to teach like nothing was wrong. But Sullivan was improving, and that mattered. By the end of 2 hours, he was hitting within 6 inches of center at 50 yards. Not perfect, but measurably better. When Bradford called time, Sullivan was actually smiling. "Ma'am," he said to Emma, "that's the first time shooting has ever made sense to me." Emma felt something warm bloom in her chest despite the exhaustion, despite the fear about her father, despite everything. This was why teaching mattered. This moment right here, when someone discovered they could do something they'd thought was impossible. Bradford made his notes and dismissed the candidates for a 30-minute break. Emma found a quiet corner behind the equipment shed and called the hospital. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the phone. The nurse who answered checked on Jim and reported back, stable, sleeping, vitals holding steady for now. Not dead, not dying at this exact moment. Emma would take it. She splashed water on her face from a hose bib, tried to wash away the exhaustion that was seeping into her bones like poison. Her reflection in a truck side mirror showed someone she barely recognized. Eyes bloodshot and hollow, skin pale, lips cracked from breathing through her mouth because her sinuses were so clogged from crying. 3 more days, 72 more hours. She could endure anything for 72 hours. Couldn't she? When the candidates reassembled, Bradford stood before them with the expression of someone about to deliver news that would hurt. "Based on today's performance, one of you is going home." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "Corporal Anderson, you identified problems correctly, but your teaching methodology was disorganized. The student improved, but not as much as they could have with better instruction. You're eliminated." Anderson's face went blank. He nodded once, gathered his gear, and left without a word. The kind of discipline that came from years of learning not to show weakness. 4 candidates left: Emma, Tors, Park, Chen. 3 more days to determine which one would walk away with the position. Bradford's eyes found Emma, Cassidy a word. Emma followed him to his truck, legs feeling like water. "Your father," Bradford said quietly, "how is he?" "Dying. And you're here anyway." "He ordered me to be." Bradford nodded slowly. "That sounds like Jim, always putting the mission first. But I need you to understand something. If you need to leave, if you need to be with him, that's not weakness. That's being human." Emma's vision blurred with tears she was too tired to hold back. "He told me watching me quit would hurt worse than dying. So I'm not quitting." "How much sleep did you get last night?" 3 hours, maybe." Bradford was quiet for a moment. "I'm calling an early end to today. All candidates dismissed at 1400 instead of 1800. That gives you 4 extra hours. Use them to rest or see your father, both if you can manage it." "Thank you, Master Chief." "Don't thank me. Just survive tomorrow. Because day 5 and 6 are going to be the hardest days of your life." Emma drove to the hospital at 1400 sharp. The 4 hours of extra rest Bradford had given her meant she could spend time with Jim without completely destroying herself. Jim was awake when she arrived, looking marginally better than he had at 4 in the morning. The doctors had adjusted his medications, given him something for the pain that made his eyes a little glassy but took the edge off his suffering. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Still there, 4 left." Jim smiled, and for just a moment Emma could see the man he'd been before war and disease had carved him down to this fragile shell. "That's my girl." Emma pulled her chair close to his bed. "I taught a kid today. Sullivan. He'd never had real instruction before, just taught himself from videos. And by the end of 2 hours, he actually got it. You could see it on his face when everything clicked." "That's the gift," Jim said quietly. "That moment when someone realizes they're capable of more than they thought. That's why teaching matters more than shooting." He reached for her hand with his trembling fingers. I'm proud of you, Em. Not for still being in the selection, for going back after being here, for choosing to finish what you started even when it was the hardest thing you could do. Emma felt tears building again. I don't know if I can do this for 3 more days. Compete all day, come here at night, pretend I'm okay when I'm falling apart. You're not pretending. Jim's grip tightened slightly. You're enduring, that's different. Pretending is fake. Enduring is real. And you're doing it because it matters. A doctor appeared in the doorway, the same young one from earlier. Miss Cassidy, could I speak with you? Emma followed him into the hallway, dreading whatever was coming next. Your father's condition has stabilized for now, the doctor said, but I need you to understand that this is likely temporary. The seizure caused additional damage. His brain function is declining. We're managing symptoms, but the underlying disease is progressing rapidly. How long? The doctor's expression was professionally sympathetic. Days to weeks. I'm sorry I can't be more specific, but you should prepare yourself for the possibility that he could deteriorate quickly. Emma nodded numbly, filed that information away with all the other unbearable truths she was carrying. She spent another 2 hours with Jim, just sitting with him, memorizing the sound of his breathing, the feel of his hand in hers. At 1700, a nurse gently suggested she go home and get some rest. Tomorrow would be demanding for both of them. Emma drove home, forced herself to eat something, and collapsed into bed at 1830. She set 3 alarms, terrified she'd sleep through them all. Her body felt like it had been beaten with hammers. Every muscle ached. Her head pounded with a dehydration headache she didn't have the energy to fix. She was asleep in 30 seconds. The alarms went off at 0400. Emma woke feeling marginally more human. 7.5 hours of sleep. Not enough to erase the exhaustion, but enough to function. Day 5 began with Bradford's announcement that today and tomorrow would be combined into a single extended challenge. 48 hours. The 4 candidates would be given a squad of Marines to train from scratch, taking them from basic competence to tactical proficiency in 2 days. We're not eliminating anyone today, Bradford said. Tomorrow at 1800 hours, we'll evaluate all 4 squads. The 2 best instructors continue to day 7. The other 2 go home. He assigned squads randomly. Emma drew 8 Marines, all of them young, most of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. She had 48 hours to turn them into a cohesive unit that could shoot, move, and communicate under pressure. Emma looked at her squad, saw the skepticism in their faces, the doubt. They'd been assigned the youngest instructor, the only woman, the civilian with no combat deployments. They were probably already writing her off. Good, let them underestimate her. She'd been underestimated her entire life. Listen up, Emma said, her voice cutting through the morning air. My name is Emma Cassidy. I'm not a Marine. I've never deployed. I learned everything I know from my father, who was one of the finest tactical instructors this country ever produced. She paused, made eye contact with each Marine. For the next 48 hours, I'm going to teach you the same way he taught me, with patience, with discipline, and with the absolute expectation that you're capable of more than you think. Some of you doubt that. That's fine. Doubt me all you want. But at the end of 2 days, you're going to be better shooters than you were at the start. That's not a hope. That's a promise. The first 12 hours were brutal. Emma ran her squad through fundamentals, correcting stance and grip and breathing until her voice was hoarse. She demonstrated every technique herself, showed them what right looked like, then made them practice until muscle memory took over. Her body screamed for rest. Her vision would occasionally blur at the edges, but she kept moving, kept teaching, kept pushing through exhaustion that felt like drowning in molasses. At 1300 hours, Emma called a break. Bradford had authorized 1-hour lunch breaks for instructors to rest and prepare. Emma used it differently. She drove to the hospital. 19 minutes there, 20 minutes with Jim, 19 minutes back, 58 minutes total. Jim was sleeping when she arrived, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed, measuring the decline of systems that were slowly giving up. Emma sat with him, didn't wake him, just held his hand for 20 minutes. She was back at Ironwood at 13:58. Her Marines were waiting, and they'd noticed something had shifted in her. The exhaustion was visible now, but so was the determination underneath it. This woman was running herself into the ground for them, and they recognized it. The afternoon training session went better. Her squad was starting to trust her, starting to believe that she actually gave a damn about making them better. By 2200 hours, when Emma finally called halt, her Marines were moving like a unit. Not perfect, but cohesive. They were starting to trust each other, starting to understand that good shooting was about more than individual skill. Emma sent them to get food and rest, told them to be back at 0500. Then she drove back to the hospital. Jim was awake this time, struggling to stay conscious through the pain medication. "How's it going?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Good, they're learning." Emma smoothed his blanket, a useless gesture, but she needed to do something. Tomorrow's the final evaluation for squads, then one more day after that. "You'll do fine, you always do." "Dad," Emma started, then stopped. She didn't know how to say what she was feeling. The fear, the exhaustion, the grief that was already settling into her bones even though he was still breathing. "I know," Jim said quietly. "I know, kiddo." Emma stayed until he fell asleep, then drove home through streets that were empty except for her and the weight of what was coming. She forced down a protein shake, set her alarms, and collapsed into bed at 0100. 4 hours of sleep, then day 6 would begin. When the alarms went off at 0500, Emma's body initially refused to move. Every muscle felt locked in place. Her head pounded. Her eyes burned. But she forced herself up, forced herself into the shower, forced herself to drink coffee that tasted like ash. This was day 6, the final evaluation of squad training. After this, only 2 candidates would remain. Her Marines assembled at 0500 sharp, ready for the final day of training before evaluation. Emma looked at them and felt a surge of pride despite her exhaustion. These kids had worked their asses off for the past day and a half. She ran them through tactical scenarios, building on the fundamentals from day 5. Room clearing, cover and concealment, engaging multiple targets under time pressure. Her Marines were responding now, adapting, showing the kind of growth that made teaching worthwhile. Emma's hands shook as she demonstrated techniques. Her voice cracked when she gave commands. At one point, she had to lean against a barrier for 30 seconds because her legs simply gave out. One of her Marines, a corporal named Jenkins, approached during a water break. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Emma wanted to laugh, wanted to cry, wanted to tell him that her father was dying and she was here instead of there, and no, she was absolutely not okay. Instead, she said, "I'm fine, Jenkins. Let's get back to work." At noon, Bradford announced that evaluation would begin at 1400 hours. All 4 squads would run the same tactical course. Scoring would be based on accuracy, speed, and teamwork. The 2 instructors whose squads performed best would advance to day 7. Emma used the lunch break to drive to the hospital one more time. This time, when she entered Jim's room, he looked worse. Much worse. Gray skin, labored breathing, the unmistakable appearance of someone whose body was giving up. But his eyes opened when she sat down, and they were still clear. "Made it to day 6, Emma said. "Evaluation this afternoon. Tomorrow's the final day if I make it." Jim smiled weakly. "Knew you would." "The doctor says they might move you to hospice tomorrow." Emma's voice broke. "Maybe the day after." Jim's hand found hers, trembling worse than ever. I need to tell you something. I might not make it to see you finish." "Don't say that." "It's true, and I need you to promise me that if I'm gone before day 7, you finish anyway. You don't quit. You honor what we built together." Emma was crying now, couldn't help it. "I promise." She stayed until a nurse reminded her she needed to get back. Jim was sleeping by then, his breathing shallow but steady. Emma kissed his forehead, whispered "I love you," and left knowing she might never speak to him again. The drive back to Ironwood took 11 minutes. Emma made it in 8, speeding through yellow lights, her vision blurred with tears she couldn't stop. She arrived at 13:58, 2 minutes to spare. Her squad was waiting. They took one look at her face and knew something was terribly wrong, but they didn't ask, just formed up and prepared to demonstrate everything she taught them. At 1400 hours, Emma's squad ran their tactical course. They weren't the fastest, they weren't the flashiest, but they were solid, consistent, hitting their targets with the kind of steady competence that came from understanding fundamentals. Emma watched from the observation point, swaying on her feet, running on nothing but will and the knowledge that her father needed her to finish this. When the final score was tallied, Emma's squad placed second. Rachel Torr's squad placed first. Park and Chen were third and fourth. Bradford addressed the 4 instructors. "Torres, Cassidy, you advanced to day 7. Park, Chen, you're eliminated. Thank you for your dedication." 2 more gone. Emma felt relief and guilt in equal measure. She'd made it to the final day. But 2 good instructors were going home, and her father was in a hospital bed, possibly breathing his last while she was here chasing something that suddenly felt hollow. Bradford dismissed everyone except Emma and Torres. "Tomorrow is the final challenge," he said. "You'll each teach a master class. 2 hours, open format, subject of your choice. We'll have 30 Marines watching plus evaluators. Whoever delivers the better class gets Quantico." He looked at Emma, and she saw concern in his weathered face. "Cassidy, I need to ask you directly. Can you do this? Can you teach tomorrow?" Emma's legs were shaking. Her vision swam. She'd been awake for 13 hours, had driven to the hospital twice, had taught a full day of tactical instruction while running on fumes. "Yes, Master Chief, I can do it." Bradford nodded slowly. "Then get some rest. You've earned it." Emma drove to the hospital for the 3rd time that day. Her hands on the steering wheel felt like they belonged to someone else. Her body was a machine running on autopilot, following programming laid down by 13 years of discipline. When she entered Jim's room at 18:30, he was worse, significantly worse. The young doctor intercepted her. "Miss Cassidy, we're moving your father to hospice tonight. We've arranged transport for 2100 hours." Emma nodded numbly. "Can I stay with him until then?" "Of course." She sat with Jim for 2.5 hours. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes confused, sometimes simply gone to whatever place pain and medication took him. At 2000, during one of his lucid moments, he looked at her with absolute clarity. "Tomorrow's day 7, he said. "Yes." "What are you going to teach?" Emma realized she'd been so focused on surviving each day that she hadn't planned for the end. "I don't know yet." "Teach what I taught you," Jim said. "Not the shooting, the why it matters, why we do this." His breathing was getting more labored. I need to tell you something. I might not be here when you finish tomorrow. Dad. Listen, his grip on her hand was weak but insistent. I'm proud of you. Not for making it this far, for trying, for choosing, for enduring when most people would have quit. He took a shaky breath. Whatever happens tomorrow, whether I'm here or not, you finish that class. You teach those Marines why this matters. And then you come find me wherever I am, and you tell me how it went. Emma was sobbing now, full body shaking that she couldn't control. At 2100, the hospice transport team arrived. Emma rode with them in the ambulance, holding her father's hand as they transferred him to a quiet facility that smelled like flowers and the kind of medicinal air freshener that couldn't quite mask the reality underneath. They settled Jim into a peaceful room with windows overlooking a garden. Emma stayed until midnight, until the hospice nurse gently suggested she needed sleep. At home, Emma sat at the kitchen table with her father's old training notebook spread before her. 13 years of lessons, of wisdom, of the philosophy that had made Jim Cassidy one of the finest instructors the Marine Corps had ever produced. And somewhere in those pages, Emma found her master class. Not about shooting, about why shooting mattered, about discipline and control and the responsibility that came with skill, about teaching people to be better versions of themselves. She worked until 0300, running on coffee and the kind of clarity that sometimes comes in the deepest exhaustion. Her hands shook as she wrote notes. Her eyes burned. But the class took shape, built from her father's wisdom and her own experience. At 0330, Emma finally went to bed. She had 90 minutes before her alarm would go off. 90 minutes to rest before the most important day of her life. Day 7 was coming. And Emma Cassidy, exhausted and grieving and held together by nothing but discipline and love, was ready to meet it. Emma didn't sleep on the night before day 7. Sleep felt like betrayal when her father was counting down his final hours in a hospital bed 19 minutes away. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table surrounded by his training notebooks, building a master class that would honor everything he'd taught her about why teaching mattered more than shooting. At 3 in the morning, her phone buzzed, a text from the hospital. "Your father is asking for you." Emma was in her car before the phone stopped vibrating, driving through empty streets under a sky that was just beginning to think about dawn. The hospital parking lot was nearly empty at this hour, just a few scattered vehicles belonging to night shift workers and people keeping vigil over the dying. Jim was awake when she entered his room. The machines surrounding his bed beeped their steady rhythm, measuring the decline of systems that were running out of time. But his eyes were clear when they found her face, holding that same fierce pride they'd always held. "You should be home sleeping," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper, worn thin by pain and medication. "Big day tomorrow." Couldn't sleep. Emma pulled her chair close to his bed, took his trembling hand in both of hers, kept thinking about the master class, about what to teach. "Tell me." So Emma told him about her plan to teach not just mechanics but philosophy, not just how to shoot but why it mattered, about discipline and responsibility and the weight that came with being good at something dangerous. Jim listened without interrupting, the way he always had. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That's good," he said finally. "That's really good, Em. You're teaching what I spent 28 years learning, that the weapon doesn't matter, the person holding it does." He shifted in his bed, wincing with the effort. "I need to tell you something. The doctors are moving me to hospice today. This afternoon, probably. They say it's time." Emma felt her chest constrict. "Dad, I can postpone the master class. stay with you through the transfer. No, Jim's grip tightened slightly. You're going to walk into that classroom at 0900 and you're going to teach the best damn class those Marines have ever seen. And when you're done, when you've won that position, then you come find me. What if you're not here when I finish? The question hung between them like a physical thing, heavy with all the fear Emma had been carrying since that first phone call at 2 in the morning. Then I won't be here, Jim said quietly, but you'll still have taught that class. You'll still have honored what we built together, and that matters more than me getting to see the end. Emma was crying now, couldn't help it. The tears came hot and fast, burning tracks down her face. I'm not ready to lose you. Nobody ever is. Jim's voice was gentle despite the pain she could hear underneath. But ready or not, it's happening. So we get to choose how we face it. And I'm choosing to face it knowing my daughter is out there doing something that matters. He paused, gathering strength for what came next. When I die, Em, and I will die probably soon, I need you to remember something. You didn't fail me by not being here. You honored me by finishing what we started. That's the gift. Not the goodbye, but the legacy. A nurse appeared in the doorway, apologetic but firm. Visiting hours don't start until 6, Miss Cassidy. Emma stood, leaned down, and kissed her father's forehead. His skin was papery thin, hot with the fever that came from a body consuming itself. I love you, Dad. Love you too, kiddo. Now go show them what a Cassidy can do. Emma drove to Ironwood as the sun was rising, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and gold that felt too beautiful for a day this hard. The parking lot was already full when she arrived. Rachel Torres was there, along with Wade and Master Chief Bradford, and what looked like 30 Marines assembled for the final evaluation. Bradford approached as Emma was gathering her materials from the car. "How's your father?" he asked quietly. "Dying. They're moving him to hospice this afternoon." Bradford's weathered face showed no surprise, just the kind of acceptance that came from watching too many good men leave the world before their time. "You want to postpone?" "No," Emma's voice was steady despite everything. "He wants me to finish this, so I'm finishing it." Bradford nodded slowly. "Your father's a hell of a Marine, always was." The two instructors were given 1 hour to set up their classrooms. Torres chose the main range, setting up targets and weapons for a hands-on technical demonstration. Emma chose the indoor classroom, arranging chairs in a semicircle, putting a single empty chair at the front where she would teach from. At 0830, Bradford assembled the Marines and evaluators. "Today, you'll observe 2 master classes. Each instructor has 2 hours to teach whatever they believe is most important about marksmanship instruction. Pay attention. What you see today represents 2 different philosophies about teaching Marines to fight." He consulted his clipboard. "Gunnery Sergeant Torres will teach first. Instructor Cassidy will teach second. Questions?" No one spoke. "Torres, you're up." Rachel Torres taught a brilliant class on advanced shooting positions and unconventional platforms. She demonstrated techniques that came from actual combat experience, showed the Marines how to shoot from vehicles, around barriers, in positions they'd never practiced in peacetime. It was impressive, professional, exactly the kind of tactical expertise the Marine Corps valued. When Torres finished at 10:30, the Marines applauded. Bradford made notes, but his expression revealed nothing. 15-minute break, he announced, then Instructor Cassidy. Emma used those 15 minutes to call the hospital. The nurse who answered checked on Jim and reported back. "Still here. Still stable. They're preparing for the hospice transfer at 1300 hours. 2.5 hours from now. Emma would be done by then, would be able to get to the hospital before they moved him, would get to say one more goodbye. If he lasted that long. At 10:45 exactly, Emma stood before 30 Marines and 4 evaluators. She'd left the weapons locked in the armory, brought no targets, no range equipment, nothing except her father's oldest training notebook and the lessons he'd spent 13 years teaching her. "My name is Emma Cassidy," she began. "I'm 23 years old. I've never served in the military. I've never deployed to combat. By every conventional measure, I have no business standing in front of you today." She paused, letting that sink in. "But I'm here anyway because my father spent 13 years teaching me that shooting isn't about the gun. It's about the person holding it. And the most important question isn't can you hit a target. It's why does it matter that you can?" Emma moved to the empty chair at the front and sat down, not standing over them like an authority figure, but sitting with them like a peer who had something to share. "My father is Colonel Jim Cassidy, Marine Corps retired, Medal of Honor recipient. He saved 8 men in Fallujah in 2004 by charging an insurgent position alone. Took 17 pieces of shrapnel and should have died. They gave him the highest honor this country can bestow." She opened the old notebook, let them see the pages filled with her father's handwriting. "But you know what he told me about that day. He said the medal didn't matter. What mattered was that 8 men went home to their families because he was willing to sacrifice himself. The award was just paperwork. The lives were real." Emma stood, began walking slowly around the semicircle. "We teach marksmanship in the military because we need people who can fight. That's true. But if that's all we teach, if we only focus on making you good at killing, then we've failed. Because being good at something dangerous comes with responsibility." She stopped, made eye contact with a young Marine in the front row. "What's your name?" "Private Chen, ma'am." "Private Chen, if I teach you to shoot at expert level, what are you going to do with that skill?" The Marine looked uncertain. "Use it to defend my country, ma'am." "That's the right answer for a test." Emma's voice was gentle but firm. "But I'm asking what you're actually going to do with it. Are you going to use it wisely? Are you going to understand the weight of being able to end a life from 400 yards away? Are you going to carry that responsibility with the seriousness it deserves?" She moved on, addressing the whole group now. "My father taught me that every shot you take in combat changes you. Either you become someone who understands the gravity of that power, or you become someone who forgets that pulling a trigger means someone doesn't go home. The weapon doesn't care which one you become, but you should." Emma returned to the front of the room. "So here's what I want to teach you today. Not about shooting positions or trigger control or any of the technical skills you already know. I want to teach you about why those skills matter, about the responsibility that comes with being good at something that can take life." For the next 90 minutes, Emma taught them her father's philosophy. She talked about discipline as self-control, not just following orders, about precision as a form of respect for the weapon and the target, about the difference between being a shooter and being a warrior. She told them stories her father had told her, about Marines who'd hesitated when they should have fired and died for it, about Marines who'd fired when they should have hesitated and lived with the guilt, about the thin line between necessary force and unnecessary violence. She showed them her father's notebooks, let them see 13 years of lessons distilled into principles that went beyond mechanics. "Shooting is meditation," Emma said, echoing her father's words from 1,000 training sessions. "It's breath control and patience and the ability to be still in a world that's chaos. Master that and you're not just a better shooter. You're a better Marine, a better person." As she taught, Emma felt something shift in the room. The Marines weren't just listening anymore. They were engaged, leaning forward, asking questions that went deeper than technique. One Marine, a sergeant with 3 deployment stripes, raised his hand. "Ma'am, how do you maintain that mindset when you're actually in combat? When people are shooting at you, and your friends are dying and everything's falling apart?" Emma thought about her father in that hospital bed, thought about the choice she'd made to be here instead of there, thought about finishing the mission when everything in her wanted to quit. "You decide what matters more," she said quietly, "your fear or your responsibility, and then you act on that decision. It doesn't make it easy, but it makes it possible." At 12:15, with 45 minutes left in her allotted time, Emma's phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it, kept teaching, but it buzzed again and again. "Excuse me," she said to the assembled Marines. "I need to check this." She pulled out her phone, 3 missed calls from the hospital, 2 text messages. The first text was from the nurse. "Your father is asking for you, urgently." The second was from Wade. They called me. You need to get to the hospital, now." Emma felt the world tilt. She looked at the Marines watching her, at Bradford standing in the back with his clipboard, at the clock that showed she still had 45 minutes of teaching left. Everything her father had said came rushing back. Finish the mission. Honor the legacy. Don't let fear make you quit. But this was different. This was real. He was dying right now, and she was here teaching a class to Marines who would be fine without her. Emma looked at Bradford. Her voice, when it came, was steady despite the panic crawling up her throat. "Master Chief, I need to go to the hospital. My father is dying." The room went completely silent. Bradford studied her face for 3 long seconds. Then he nodded once. "You have 45 minutes left in your evaluation period." "I understand." Emma was already moving toward the door, "but I need to go." "If you leave now, you forfeit the position." The words stopped Emma cold. She turned back to face Bradford, and in his weathered face she saw not cruelty but the same impossible choice her father had faced in Fallujah. Mission or survival, duty or desire, what matters more? "Gunnery Sergeant Torres has completed her full 2 hours, Bradford continued. His voice was emotionless, just stating facts. "You have not. The evaluation criteria are clear." Emma felt something crack open in her chest. She looked at the Marines, at Torres standing off to the side, at the position she'd fought for 6 days to earn. $95,000. The job her father wanted her to have. The legacy he'd built specifically for her. And then she thought about him alone in a hospital room, asking for her, spending his final moments without his daughter because she was chasing something he'd told her mattered more than his death. "I'm sorry," Emma said. She was crying now, but her voice was clear. "I can't finish this class. I have to go to my father." She didn't wait for Bradford's response, didn't wait to be officially eliminated, just grabbed her father's notebook and ran for the parking lot. The drive to the hospital took 11 minutes. Emma made it in 7, running 2 red lights and praying she wouldn't be too late. She burst through the hospital doors at a dead sprint, ignoring the protests from the front desk staff, running down hallways she'd memorized over the past 3 days. Jim's room, 3rd floor, East Wing, room 317. Emma hit the door so hard it banged against the wall, and there he was. Still breathing, still alive, eyes closed but chest rising and falling with labored effort. The nurse in the room looked up, startled. "Miss Cassidy, we tried to call you." "I'm here." Emma crossed to the bed, took her father's hand. "I'm here, Dad." Jim's eyes fluttered open, confused at first, then focusing on her face. The confusion melted into something that might have been relief. "Why are you here?" His voice was barely audible. "You should be teaching." "I was, but you needed me more." "The class." "I left it." Emma's tears were falling freely now. "I forfeited the position. Tours wins by default, but I'm here, I'm with you." Something flickered across Jim's face. Not disappointment, but something more complex. Understanding, maybe, or acceptance. "You chose me." "I chose you." Jim's hand tightened on hers with surprising strength. "That's wrong." Emma's heart stuttered. "What?" "You should have finished the class." His breathing was labored, but his voice was clear. "That was the mission. That's what I trained you to do. Finish regardless of what else is happening." "Dad, you were dying." "I'm still dying." Jim's eyes held hers with fierce intensity. "But dying can wait. Teaching can't. Those Marines, they only had that moment with you. I'll have forever." Emma shook her head. "I couldn't do it. I couldn't just keep teaching while you were here alone." "Why not?" "Because I love you more than I love that job." Jim was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, and it was the saddest, proudest smile Emma had ever seen. "That's the right answer," he said softly. "Not for a Marine, but for a daughter." He took a shaky breath. "But Em, you need to understand something. I didn't spend 13 years training you to be my daughter. I spent 13 years training you to be a warrior, and warriors finish their missions." The tears were blurring Emma's vision now. "I'm sorry I failed you." "You didn't fail me." Jim's grip tightened again. "You made a choice, and it was the hardest choice you'll ever make, but it was yours to make." They sat like that for several minutes, hand in hand, while machines beeped and the world moved on outside the window. Finally, Jim spoke again. "The hospice transfer. The nurse said it's scheduled for 1300. It's 12:45 now. You don't have to move if you're not ready." "I'm ready." Jim's voice was peaceful despite the pain. "But before they move me, I need you to do something for me." "Anything." "Go back to Ironwood." Emma's head snapped up. "What?" "Bradford will still be there. The evaluators. Go back and ask if you can finish what you started." "Dad, I forfeited. Tours already won." "Maybe, maybe not. But you'll never know unless you ask." Jim's eyes were bright with something that might have been hope or might have been fever. "And I need to know that you tried. That you didn't give up just because it got hard." "I didn't give up, I chose you." "I know, and that's beautiful. But now I'm choosing for you." Jim's voice gained strength from somewhere. "I'm ordering you as your instructor to go back and finish that mission." The nurse in the corner cleared her throat gently. "Mr. Cassidy, you need to rest. The transport team will be here in 10 minutes." Jim ignored her. "Em, go." Emma stood slowly, torn between staying with her father and honoring his last request. It felt impossible, cruel, exactly the kind of thing Jim Cassidy would demand because he believed she could do it. "I'll come back," Emma said. "As soon as I finish, I'll meet you at hospice." "I'll be waiting." Emma leaned down, kissed her father's forehead one more time. Then she turned and ran. The drive back to Ironwood took 9 minutes. Emma pulled into the parking lot at 1300 hours exactly. Most of the vehicles were gone. The Marines had been dismissed, but Bradford's truck was still there, along with Wade's and 2 others she didn't recognize. Emma found them in the main office. Bradford, Wade, and 2 evaluators she recognized from the master class. They all looked up when she entered. "Instructor Cassidy," Bradford said. His voice was neutral, professional. "We weren't expecting you back." Emma stood in the doorway, still breathing hard from the run, her face tear-streaked and her hands shaking. "Master Chief, I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." Can I finish my master class? Bradford exchanged glances with the two evaluators. You forfeited your position when you left. I understand that, but my father asked me to come back and finish anyway, not for the position, just to complete what I started. One of the evaluators, a Colonel Emma didn't know, leaned forward. Your father is dying. Why aren't you with him? Because he told me this was more important. Emma's voice cracked but held. He said warriors finish their missions, and I need to honor that even if it means I don't win. Bradford was quiet for a long moment, then he stood. The other Marines are gone, dismissed for the day, but we're still here. We can be your class if you want to finish. Emma felt something loosen in her chest. Yes, please. They reconvened in the classroom. 4 men instead of 30, but an audience nonetheless. Emma stood where she'd stood before, opened her father's notebook, and continued teaching. She talked about legacy, about what it meant to pass knowledge to the next generation, about the responsibility of being good at something dangerous, and the importance of teaching others to carry that responsibility well. She taught for exactly 45 minutes, completing her full 2-hour requirement. When she finished, the room was quiet. Bradford made a note on his clipboard. Then he looked up. Instructor Cassidy, why did you come back? Because my father spent his whole life teaching me that finishing matters more than winning, and I needed to prove to him and to myself that I learned that lesson. Even though it cost you the position. Especially because it cost me the position. Bradford nodded slowly. He turned to the two evaluators. Gentlemen, your assessment. The colonel spoke first. I've been evaluating Marine instructors for 15 years. That was the most honest teaching I've ever witnessed. She didn't teach them to be better shooters. She taught them to be better Marines. The second evaluator, a sergeant major, nodded. Agreed. Torres taught excellent tactics, but Cassidy taught philosophy. Both matter, but philosophy lasts longer. Bradford made more notes. Then he set down his clipboard and looked at Emma. Instructor Cassidy, you forfeited your position by leaving before completing your evaluation period. By the letter of the rules, Gunnery Sergeant Torres wins this selection. Emma nodded, feeling the weight of that truth settle into her bones. However, Bradford continued, the purpose of this selection was not to find the best shooter or even the best tactician. It was to find someone who could teach Marines why marksmanship matters. Someone who understands that we're not just building trigger pullers. We're building warriors. He paused. You came back and finished your class knowing you'd already lost. You did it because your father asked you to, because the mission mattered more than the outcome. That's the kind of instructor the Marine Corps needs. Emma's heart was pounding. Master Chief, what are you saying? I'm saying that both you and Gunnery Sergeant Torres demonstrated excellence, but you demonstrated something more. You demonstrated character, and character is what we're really selecting for. Bradford picked up his clipboard again. The position at Quantico is yours, Instructor Cassidy, if you still want it. Emma couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what she was hearing. But I forfeited. You left to be with your dying father. Then you came back to honor his request. That's not forfeit, that's integrity. The sergeant major spoke up. For what it's worth, Miss Cassidy, I'd be proud to serve with someone who makes the choices you made today. Emma felt tears streaming down her face again, but this time they were different. Not grief or fear, but something that might have been joy mixed with disbelief. Master Chief, I need to get to hospice. My father is being transferred right now. Go, Bradford said. We'll handle the paperwork. You start in 30 days, but right now you go be with your dad. Emma didn't remember running to her car, didn't remember the drive. All she knew was that suddenly she was at the hospice facility, being led down a quiet hallway to a room that smelled like flowers and antiseptic. Jim was already settled in his bed, looking smaller somehow in this new space. But his eyes opened when Emma entered, and they were clear. "You came back," he said. "I did. I finished the class." "And—" Emma sat beside his bed, took his hand, and smiled through her tears. "I got it, Dad. I got the position." Jim's whole face transformed. The pain lines smoothed out for just a moment, replaced by pure joy. "That's my girl. I knew you would. I left in the middle to be with you. Thought I'd forfeited, but Bradford said choosing to finish anyway was what mattered." Jim nodded slowly. He understands. Warriors finish their missions, even when it costs them everything. He took a labored breath. "So you're going to Quantico, going to teach Marines, going to carry on what we built together." "In 30 days, Emma's voice broke. "Will you still be here in 30 days? Jim didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "I want you to promise me something." "Anything." "When I'm gone, when you're standing in front of your first class at Quantico, I want you to teach them what you taught today. Not just the mechanics, the why, the purpose, the legacy." "I promise." "And one more thing." She leaned closer. "Don't you dare quit because I'm not there to see it. You teach every class like I'm watching, because I will be. Maybe not in body, but in every lesson you learned, every principle you carry. That's how I stay alive. Through you." Emma was sobbing now, full body shaking sobs that she couldn't control. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, kiddo." Jim's eyes were drifting closed, the medication and exhaustion pulling him under. "And I'm proud of you. Not for winning, for trying, for choosing, for finishing." The days that followed blurred together. Emma stayed at the hospice, leaving only to shower and change clothes. She sat with her father as he drifted in and out of consciousness, as the morphine took him further and further from the world. On the 4th day, Wade came to visit. He sat with Emma in silence for an hour, two old friends keeping vigil over a man they both loved. "You know what Jim told me once," Wade said finally, after a particularly bad operation in Iraq. He said the hardest part of being an instructor wasn't teaching people to fight. It was knowing some of them wouldn't come home. Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. But he kept teaching anyway, because he believed it mattered, that giving them the best chance was worth carrying the weight of the ones who didn't make it. Wade looked at Emma. "You're going to carry that weight now. Every Marine you teach, you'll wonder if they'll come home, and some won't. But you'll teach them anyway because your father taught you that's what matters." On the 7th day, Jim Cassidy stopped breathing. Emma was holding his hand when it happened. There was no dramatic moment, no last words, just a breath, and then no more breaths, just stillness and the sound of machines that no longer mattered. She sat with him for a long time after, memorizing his face, thanking him for everything he'd taught her, promising to honor his legacy. The funeral was held at Fort Sam Houston National Cemetery with full military honors. 21 guns, flag-folding ceremony. A chaplain who'd never met Jim but spoke about sacrifice and service, and the price good men pay for believing in something larger than themselves. Master Chief Bradford delivered the eulogy. "Colonel Jim Cassidy saved my life in Fallujah," he said. "But his greatest act wasn't on the battlefield. It was in his garage, teaching his daughter to shoot. Because Emma Cassidy is his legacy, and through her, he'll teach thousands more." After the funeral, after the reception, after all the well-wishers had gone home, Emma sat in her father's garage surrounded by his equipment. She opened his primary training notebook to the last page and found an entry dated the day before he'd gone to the hospital. The handwriting was shaky but legible. Em, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Good. I was getting tired anyway. I've been a Marine, a father, and a teacher. Best job was father. Second best was teacher. You were both my student and my reason. Everything I knew about shooting I taught you. But the last lesson I never got to say, teaching isn't about making people like you. It's about making people better than you. That's why I'm not sad you're reading this, because it means I succeeded. You're already better than me, Em, always were. Now go teach them what I taught you, and when you're old and gray, teach someone else. That's how we beat death, not by living forever, but by teaching someone who will. Semper Fi, kiddo. Love, Dad. Emma closed the notebook, stood, and looked around the garage that had been her classroom for 13 years. Then she picked up her father's old Remington 870, the one he'd first put in her hands when she was 12 years old, and she headed to Ironwood. Wade found her there 2 hours later, running drills in the darkness, practicing the fundamentals her father had drilled into her thousands of times. You okay? Wade asked. No, but I will be. He sat on a bench and watched her shoot. After a while, he said, When do you start at Quantico? 3 weeks. You scared? Terrified? Good, Jim would be proud. Emma lowered the shotgun, safed it, and turned to face Wade. He wanted me to teach them the why, not just the how. Then that's what you'll do. 3 weeks later, Emma Cassidy stood in front of her first class at Marine Corps Base Quantico. 40 Marines, all of them watching her with the same skepticism she'd faced at the selection. Young, female, civilian background. 3 strikes in a world that valued age, masculinity, and military service. She looked at them and saw her father in every face. My name is Emma Cassidy, she began. I'm 23 years old. I learned everything I know from my father, Colonel Jim Cassidy, Marine Corps retired. He passed away 3 weeks ago. She paused, letting that information settle. Before he died, he made me promise to teach you something. Not just how to shoot, but why it matters. So that's what we're going to do for the next 8 weeks. We're going to learn fundamentals, yes. But more than that, we're going to learn what it means to be good at something dangerous. What it means to carry that responsibility with honor. One Marine in the back raised his hand. Ma'am, with all due respect, why should we listen to someone who's never deployed? Emma smiled, and it was her father's smile, equal parts patience and challenge. Because I learned from someone who deployed 7 times and came home to teach instead of taking the easy retirement. Because he believed teaching you mattered more than his legacy. And because everything I learned from him, I'm going to share with you. She picked up a rifle, performed a functions check with the kind of practice precision that came from 13 years of repetition. My father used to say that shooting is meditation. It's breath control and discipline and the ability to be still in a world that's chaos. Master that and you're not just a better shooter. You're a better Marine, a better person. Emma set the rifle down and looked at each Marine in turn. So let's get started. We've got work to do. The weeks that followed were hard. Emma pushed her Marines the way her father had pushed her, with patience and discipline, and the absolute expectation that they were capable of more than they thought. She taught them fundamentals, yes, but she also taught them philosophy, why precision mattered, why discipline was self-control, not just following orders, why being good at something dangerous came with responsibility. Some Marines resisted, some embraced it, all of them improved. At the end of 8 weeks, Emma's class posted the highest qualification scores Quantico had seen in 3 years. But more than that, they posted the lowest incident rate. No negligent discharges, no safety violations, just Marines who understood that the weapon in their hands was a tool that deserved respect. The Commandant of the Marine Corps sent Emma a letter of commendation. Master Chief Bradford called to congratulate her. Wade sent a text that just said, Jim would be proud. But the moment that mattered most came 6 months later. Emma was teaching her third class when a Marine approached her after hours. Lance Corporal Chen, the same one who'd asked why he should listen to a civilian. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you." "For what, Chen?" "For teaching us that shooting isn't about the gun. It's about the person holding it. I deployed last month, and when things got bad, when I had to make a split-second decision whether to fire, I remembered what you said, about responsibility, about the weight of that choice." Emma felt her throat tighten. "Did you make the right choice?" "I think so. I hesitated long enough to be sure, and because I did, I'm certain the target was a threat. That matters to me." "It should matter. That's exactly why my father taught me that lesson." Chen nodded. "Just wanted you to know. What you're teaching, it's saving lives. Not just the targets we engage, but the ones we choose not to." After he left, Emma sat alone in the empty classroom and felt her father's presence so strongly, it was like he was sitting beside her. "I did it, Dad," she whispered to the empty air. "I taught them the why." And in the silence that followed, she could almost hear his voice responding. "That's my girl. Now do it again tomorrow." 1 year after her father's death, Emma established the Reeves Cassidy Marksmanship Foundation. Funded by her instructor's salary and a small grant from the Marine Corps, the foundation provided free firearms training to underprivileged youth across Texas. The first class had 15 kids. The second had 23. By the end of the first year, Emma was teaching 70 young people who otherwise would never have had access to quality instruction. She taught them the same way her father had taught her, with patience, with discipline, with the understanding that shooting was about more than hitting targets. On the anniversary of Jim's death, Emma returned to Fort Sam Houston National Cemetery. She stood at his grave, the polished headstone reading simply, "Colonel James Cassidy, USMC, Medal of Honor, Teacher, Father." Someone had added a new plaque below the official marker. Emma didn't know who, but she suspected Wade or Bradford. It read, "He taught one. She teaches thousands. The legacy continues." Emma knelt and placed her hand on the cold stone. "I kept my promise, Dad. I'm teaching them what you taught me. And every class I teach, every Marine who learns to be better than they thought they could be, that's you. That's your legacy, not mine." The wind picked up, rustling through the oak trees that surrounded the cemetery. For just a moment, Emma let herself believe it was her father's voice, telling her he was proud. She stood, brushed the grass from her knees, and headed back to her car. She had a class to teach tomorrow. 40 new Marines who needed to learn not just how to shoot, but why it mattered. And Emma Cassidy, daughter of Jim, student of the best instructor the Marine Corps had ever produced, would teach them the same way her father had taught her. With discipline, with purpose, with love. Because that's how legacies were built, not in single moments of glory, but in the daily work of making people better than they were. One student at a time, one lesson at a time, one generation passing knowledge to the next. Jim Cassidy had started that chain. Emma was carrying it forward. And somewhere down the line, one of her students would pick up that torch and carry it further still. That's how you beat death, not by living forever, but by teaching someone who will. And in that truth, Emma finally found peace. I've told hundreds of military stories, but this one hit different. Emma's choice, standing in that classroom with her phone buzzing, knowing her father might not make it through the day, that's the moment that broke me. Because we all know that choice. Mission or family, duty or love. What would you have done? Left immediately to be with him or finished what you promised? Drop your answer below. And if this story reminded you of someone who taught you to be tougher than you thought possible, tell me about them. Those stories matter. Those people deserve to be remembered. New story drops every week. Don't miss the next one.